Greetings, fellow fans. You're tuned into Cross Naruto, presenting to you today, what if Naruto was born before Olympus, the primordial god the Titans feared. Hera x Rhea. Show some love by liking and subscribing. Enjoy the story ahead. Chapter 1, The God Who Watched Mountains Grow. The mountains were young once. Naruto remembered that. He remembered when the range that mortals would eventually call the Titan's spine was nothing but a long crease of pressure beneath shallow water, grinding upward in increments too slow for anything but the very old to notice. He had sat on the seafloor and watched it happen. Thousands of years of watching, with the ocean pressing warm and dark around him, and he hadn't been bored for a single moment of it. There was something deeply satisfying about watching the earth decide to become something more than it was. That was long before the Titans. Long before anything that thought of itself as a god had enough coherence to use the word. He was sitting on one of those mountains now, the tallest of them, the one that punched through cloud cover into air so thin that even divine lungs had to work for it, with his legs crossed and his eyes closed and a piece of flatbread balanced on one knee. The bread had gone cold an hour ago. He kept meaning to eat it. He kept getting distracted by the sound the wind made when it threaded through the peak formations below him, which was something between a whistle and a hum that changed pitch every time the temperature shifted, and he had been trying to figure out whether the pattern was random or whether the mountain was actually, very slowly, composing something. He was leaning toward composing something. The cosmos had a lot of opinions and not many mouths. You learn to listen for the alternatives. His eyes opened when he felt the disturbance. Not dramatically, not with any particular urgency, just the way you open your eyes when a sound you've been half expecting finally arrives. It registered in his chest before anywhere else, a specific, unmistakable frequency that meant something immense was in pain. Not mortal pain. Not even Titan pain. This was the particular anguish of someone so old and so powerful that feeling anything at all had stopped being a given centuries ago, and now the feeling had come anyway and they had no idea what to do with it. He picked up the flatbread and ate it in 2 bites, brushing crumbs off his knee. Then he followed the frequency down off the mountain. He found her at the edge of what would eventually be called the Aegean, though it didn't have a name yet. The sea was iron-gray in the late light, and the shore was nothing but dark volcanic rock worn smooth by millennia of water, and she was sitting on the largest of the rocks with her sandals beside her and her feet in the surf and her face entirely hidden behind her hands. Rhea. He had seen her from a distance before, at the great convergences when the primordials gathered and the Titans attended, standing at Cronus's side with a stillness that was too perfect to be natural, the kind of stillness you practice until your body forgets how to move any other way. She was a Titaness of the earth and seasons, which meant she was enormously powerful in the specific, patient, persistent way of things that grew and changed and endured. Her power was not loud. But it ran very, very deep. Right now she looked like someone had reached into the center of all that depth and pulled out whatever had been holding the structure together. Naruto stepped onto the dark rock and walked toward her without hiding his approach. He wasn't in the habit of sneaking up on anyone, and he especially wasn't going to start with someone who was already in a state where sudden surprises might go badly for the surrounding geography. She heard him. He watched her shoulders tighten, watched her hands press harder against her face for just a moment before she pulled them down and turned to look at him with eyes that were red-rimmed and utterly dry, because Rhea was the kind of person who had cried until there was nothing left and was now operating on the far side of tears, in that flat, scorched territory where everything felt like ash. She looked at him for a long moment. "I don't know you," she said. Her voice was surprisingly steady. "No," he agreed, and sat down on the rock a comfortable distance away, close enough to talk, far enough that she didn't have to think about him being in her space. "I'm Naruto." She didn't recognize the name. He could see that. Her brow did a small, automatic furrow of someone running through a mental catalog and coming up empty. "You're a god." "Something like that." "Something like that," she repeated, and there was a ghost of something in her voice that might have been a laugh in a different life. "That's an interesting answer. It's the honest one." He looked out at the water. The sun was low enough now that the gray had gone to a deep bruised purple, and the first stars were starting to show up in the east with that hesitant quality they had at dusk, like they weren't sure yet if it was their turn. I predate the categories a bit. God is the closest word that exists for what I am, but it's still not quite right. Rhea was quiet for a moment. The surf moved across her feet and retreated. How old are you? Old enough to remember when this mountain range was underwater. Her eyes moved to the ridge of peaks visible against the darkening sky behind them, and he saw her doing the calculation, because she was old herself and she knew what those mountains meant in terms of time, and the calculation came out to something that shifted her expression very slightly. Not afraid. Just recalibrating. And you followed she stopped. Started again. You came here because I felt you. He said it plainly, without apology or softness. From the top of that mountain. There's a frequency that very old, very powerful beings have when they're in serious pain. It carries a long way. He paused. I wasn't going to ignore it. Most would. Most do, he agreed. She looked at him with an expression that was difficult to read, too many things layered under too many years of practice at keeping things off her face. Then she looked back at the sea, and her jaw tightened, and some of the practiced composure cracked just enough to show what was underneath. I delivered another child today, she said. Demeter. My third daughter. Her voice was very quiet and very flat in the way that meant she was working hard to keep it that way. Cronus took her before she had drawn her first breath outside of me. He ate her. The word landed like a stone in water. Like he ate the others. Like he'll eat the next one, and the one after that. Naruto said nothing. He let the words be what they were. The prophecy says one of them will overthrow him, she continued. So he eats them. Every one. And I, her hands, which had been resting in her lap, curled into fists. I am the mother. And I do nothing. Because there is nothing to be done, because he is stronger, because the other titans will not move against him, because, her voice cracked, just once, a small fracture down the center of it. Because I have been telling myself that enduring is the same as surviving, and today I finally understood that it isn't. The sea moved. The stars multiplied. No, Naruto said. They're not the same thing at all. She turned to look at him, and he met her eyes directly and didn't look away, and he didn't offer her comfort and he didn't offer her solutions and he didn't tell her it would be all right, because none of those things were what she had said and none of them were what she needed. She had said a true thing out loud, probably for the first time, and what it needed was simply to be heard by someone who would not diminish it or explain it away. Something in her face changed. Not relief, that was too light a word. More like the particular exhaustion that comes when you have been bracing for a blow that doesn't come, and your muscles finally, slowly, begin to release. Who are you? She asked again, differently this time. He almost smiled. Still Naruto. They sat on the rock for a long time. The sky went fully dark and the stars came out in force, the way they did in ages before light pollution when the Milky Way was a visible river and you could count constellations the way you counted friends. Rhea didn't speak much. Neither did he. But she didn't leave, and that said more than words would have. At some point she told him about the first one. Hestia. She said her name quietly, with the careful precision of someone who says a word often enough in private that saying it aloud feels like exposing a wound. She said Hestia had made a sound, in the first moment of breath, that was like the first time a hearthfire catches properly, that specific exhale of warmth and light that made you feel that home was possible. And then Cronus had taken her, and the sound had stopped, and Rhea had not lit a fire in her own halls since. Then Hades. She said he had had her eyes. Then Demeter, who that very morning had shown the faintest shimmer of something green at her fingertips, the signature of an earth power already recognizing itself, and Cronus had seen it too and moved fast. Naruto listened to all of it. He didn't flinch, and he didn't look away, and he didn't offer the reflexive noises of sympathy that are really about the listener's discomfort more than the speaker's pain. He just listened with the particular quality of attention that very old beings develop if they develop it at all, a full, patient, undistracted presence that made the person speaking feel like the most real thing in the world at that moment. "You've seen worse," Rhea said eventually, not accusingly. "Just observing." "In terms of scale," he said. "In terms of what it means to a specific person, no. Pain doesn't scale that way. What you're carrying is exactly as heavy as it is." She looked at him sideways. "You're a strange god. I've been told. It's not an insult. I know." A wave came in larger than the others, washing cold water up to her ankles, and she didn't move. Naruto watched her stare at the horizon where the sea met the sky in a line of absolute darkness, and he could see her thinking, the particular quality of thought that was not planning but reckoning, the kind you did when you'd been presented with a truth too large to route around and had to figure out whether to walk through it or build your house on top of it. "Is he beatable?" she asked. He considered the question honestly. "Cronus?" "Yes. Yes," he said simply. "Everything that rises can fall. He is very strong and very paranoid, and he holds most of the power structures in place through fear and through the loyalty of those who benefit from him. But he's not unbeatable. The prophecy says a child of his own will do it. Prophecies are usually about the what and not the when," he said. "And they leave out most of the middle part, which is generally the most important part." Rhea was quiet for a moment. "I have thought about hiding one. The next one. Finding some way to," she stopped herself. He didn't push. He waited. "It seems impossible," she said. "He watches me constantly. He watches me the way someone watches a door they're afraid might open." She paused. "I don't think he enjoys it. I think he is simply too afraid to stop." That was a perceptive thing to say about a tyrant, Naruto thought. More perceptive than most of the people living under one managed to be, because fear was a difficult emotion to see clearly when it was also the source of your suffering. Seeing the fear in the person who terrified you didn't make them less dangerous. But it made them legible. And legible meant manageable, eventually, if you were patient enough. "You could," he said. She turned to him. "What?" "Hide one. It's possible. Not easy, and not without cost, but possible. The sea could hide a birth. Stone could. Something old enough and willing enough could stand between Cronus's attention and a single, specific moment." He met her eyes. "I'm not saying do it now. I'm saying the door isn't locked. It's just heavy." Rhea stared at him for a long time. In her eyes he could see the very careful, very dangerous process of someone allowing themselves to hope for something they had already trained themselves out of hoping for, the specific vertigo of it, the way it felt almost like grief at first, the reopening of something that had been sealed. "Why would you help me?" she asked. Blunt and real. No courtly softness. He appreciated that. He had been around long enough to find the soft-edged approach to hard questions exhausting. "Because I feel like it," he said. "And because what Cronus is doing is wrong. And because you have been sitting on this rock being honest with me for the past 3 hours, and I respect that enormously." The ghost of something passed over her face again, that almost laugh. "Those are very different sized reasons. The last one matters most, actually." She was quiet. Then she said, "You watched mountains grow." "I did. Doesn't that make mortals seem very small? Everything seems very small." He thought about this honestly. "It could," he said. "Some of the old ones, it does. They get too big for things to matter at the personal scale." He looked down at the dark water moving over the rocks, the small patient repetition of it. "I never went that way. I think because I kept paying attention to the small things. Mountains are impressive. But the first time a new kind of flower grows in soil that used to be dead," he shook his head. "That's the thing that makes you feel something." Rhea looked at him. Really looked at him, in the way she hadn't yet, and he let her because he had nothing to hide. She saw whatever she saw and something settled in her face. A decision of some kind, small but significant. "I don't know what you are," she said. "But I think you might be someone I need to know." "The feeling is mutual," he said. The first time he saw Cronus it was not face to face. It was 3 weeks after the night on the rocks, in the high plateau country where the Titans kept their primary strongholds, and Naruto was moving through the edge of those territories on his way toward the northern sea because he had heard something interesting about a new volcanic island forming and wanted to see it up close. He was not hiding. He was not sneaking. He was walking in the open, through tall grass that was gold in the late season, when he felt the pressure of a massive, surveilling awareness sweep across the plateau like a lighthouse beam. Cronus checking his territory. Naruto stopped and let it pass over him. He felt the awareness snag on him slightly, the way it would on anything large enough and old enough to register, and he felt the distant, sharp contraction of Cronus's attention suddenly focusing, trying to classify him, trying to find him in some mental catalog and determine whether he was a threat. He sent nothing back. No aggression, no submission, no invitation. Just existence. After a moment the awareness moved on, unsatisfied, the way a predator moves on from something it can't quite identify and therefore can't quite threat assess. Naruto watched it go and felt a specific, considered contempt, not hot, not personal, just the clean assessment of someone who had been watching patterns long enough to recognize this one. Cronus's power was immense, and his paranoia was so advanced that it had become a kind of intelligence in itself. He was dangerous the way a trap was dangerous, not through wisdom or strength of character but through mechanism, through the relentlessness of fear-driven control. But he had swept over Naruto and not known what he was finding. That was information. He continued north toward the volcanic island, and the grass was gold around him, and he thought about Rhea sitting on the dark rock with her feet in the cold surf, saying he eats them, with that terrible steadiness in her voice. He thought about Hestia, who made a sound like a fire catching, and Hades with Rhea's eyes, and Demeter with green light already at her newborn fingertips. He thought about how mountains formed, all that slow, immense pressure building under the surface until the release was tectonic, inevitable, and permanent. He thought, not long now. The volcanic island was magnificent. Still half submerged, its crown of new rock steaming and cracking as it cooled, the sea around it turned mineral colors by whatever the earth was venting. Naruto sat on a piece of cooled basalt at the waterline and watched new land being made and ate the fish he'd caught that morning and was, for a time, entirely content. He had been at this a very long time. The contentment of solitude was not nothing. He had spent ages in it and never found it hollow, not exactly. He had watched civilizations rise and end, had known beings who became stars and beings who became mountains and beings who dissolved back into the chaos that had generated them. He had formed attachments. He had felt them end. He had learned a particular relationship with loss that was not peace exactly but was not destruction either, a carrying of it, a refusal to let loss make him smaller than he was. But he noticed, sitting on the cooling basalt with the steam rising around him and the sea doing its ancient repetitive work, that the world had felt slightly more vivid since the night on the dark rock. Not dramatically. Just, slightly. The fish had tasted more interesting. The mountain wind had seemed more deliberate in its composition. The Milky Way had been marginally more astonishing than usual. He noticed this with the honesty he tried to bring to everything about himself. Someone specific was making the world more interesting again. He knew what that meant. It was dangerous and precious in equal measure and he had been alive long enough to recognize both without flinching from either. He ate the last of the fish and threw the bones into the water and watched small things immediately come to investigate the offering. He thought, all right, then. He saw Rhea again 7 months later. She had come to the edge of his territory. He had not told her where he kept his primary residence, and yet she had found it, because she was a Titaness of the earth and the earth had whispered to her the same way it whispered to her the locations of aquifers and fault lines and the roots of things. She was standing at the base of the mountain he lived on, looking up at it with an expression that was doing its best to be neutral and mostly failing, and she was very visibly pregnant. He came down to meet her. She looked at him when he arrived at the base, and the thing she was feeling moved clearly across her face because apparently she had decided, at some point in the last 7 months, to stop hiding it. That decision had cost her something. He could see the cost in the particular way she held herself, the vulnerability of someone who has put down a shield they have been carrying so long their body has forgotten what it feels like without it. She started. Yes, he said. She blinked. I haven't asked anything. I know what you need. And the answer is yes. She looked at him for a long moment, and something gave way in her face, not collapse, nothing like collapse, but the kind of giving way that was actually structural relief, the kind where a thing that has been holding too much weight is finally allowed to redistribute it. Her eyes went bright and she pressed her lips together very hard. I don't know how to do this, she said quietly. I don't know how to, trust this. I have been surviving by keeping my expectations very small for a very long time. I know, he said. He didn't tell her to trust him. He didn't reassure her. He said, you can be uncertain about it while we do it. That's allowed. She let out a breath that was not quite a laugh and not quite a sob and was somehow both. You're the strangest being I've ever encountered. Third time you've said something like that. It keeps being true. She looked up at the mountain. Will it be safe here? Nothing can reach this mountain that I don't allow to reach it, he said. Not boasting. Just a fact stated plainly, the way you state facts that happen to be true. Cronus sweeps the territory, but when his awareness crosses this ground, it finds nothing worth looking at. It has never found anything worth looking at here. It won't find what needs to be hidden. She nodded, slowly, and he could see her taking that in and believing it, and the believing costing her something because she had been in a world for centuries where there was nothing safe and believing in safety was its own kind of exposure. She believed it anyway. Tell me about the plan, she said, straightening, the Titaness coming back into her posture along with something new underneath it, a sense of active agency that perhaps hadn't been there before. Not waiting and enduring. Choosing. The child will be born here, he said. The moment of birth is the moment Cronus feels for, because life entering the world makes a specific vibration and he's learned to track it. We mask it. I know how. The birth itself, I'll need you to trust me through that because it will feel strange, the way I'll have to hold the moment, but it won't hurt you and it won't hurt the child. And after? Cronus will notice the absence of, he'll get a stone. A long beat of silence. Then Rhea laughed. It was a real laugh, sudden and genuine, surprised out of her, and it changed her face completely, made her look younger, which for a Titan meant something cosmic, and also just more like herself, whatever that was under all the layers of endured grief. A stone. Wrapped appropriately. His attention is broad, not deep. He feels for life and he finds the weight and shape he expects and he doesn't look further. He paused. He has never had to look further. He has never had reason to think anything would dare. And this child goes to Crete. I know a place, and people there who owe me a very old debt and are good and will be grateful. He looked at her steadily. He'll be hidden. He'll grow. The prophecy will have its time. Rhea looked at him and the laughter had faded back into something quieter and more intense. You planned this. I thought about it, he said. After you told me about Hestia. And Hades. And Demeter. He said their names simply, with the same plainness she had used, because they deserved to be said without ceremony covering the weight of them. I thought, if she decides to try, she should have something prepared. So I prepared it. She was quiet for a moment. Then, why do you care about this? I told you why. Tell me again. He looked at her directly. Because what Cronus is doing is wrong. Because you have been surviving it alone for too long. Because you said the name of a child who made a sound like a fire catching and I found I couldn't stop thinking about it. He paused. And because you laughed just now and it sounded like something that has been underground for a very long time breaking into the light. Rhea was very still. The mountain stood behind him, immovable and old, and the air between them was clear and cold and everything was stated and nothing was crowded by it. How does this end? She asked. Not fearfully. With the directness of someone who had learned to ask the questions that mattered. I don't know exactly, he said honestly. The part where Cronus falls, that happens. The shape of what comes after is less clear. He considered. The Olympians will be different than the Titans. Not necessarily better, but different. There will be wars and settlements and a new kind of order. He looked at the sky, clear and cold and enormous. The cosmos will keep doing what it does. And you? He let the question sit for a moment. I'll still be here, he said. I always am. She looked at him for a long time. He let her look. He had been looked at by things that were pure cosmic force given temporary attention and he had never found it particularly difficult to be seen, but there was something different about the way Rhea looked at him, something that was not assessment but recognition, the particular quality of one being identifying something in another that resonates with something in themselves. Old. Stubborn. Unwilling, despite everything, to stop caring. All right, she said. And then, more quietly, as if it were a significant thing to say out loud, which it was, thank you. He nodded. Then, are you hungry? I have flatbread, but I should warn you it will probably be cold. I keep forgetting to eat it while it's warm. Rhea blinked at the shift in register. Then the almost laugh came back, and it was warmer than before. Yes, she said. I'm hungry. He stayed with her through the months. Not constantly, she was a Titaness with her own existence and her own responsibilities and the elaborate, exhausting performance of normalcy she had to maintain in Cronus's court. But he held the mountain as a place that was safe, and when she could come she came, and when she couldn't he felt the edge of her awareness touching his at a distance and was glad she was still there. They talked. This was the thing that surprised him most, how much they talked, and how easily. She had centuries of thoughts she had never said aloud to anyone because aloud was not safe, and he had millennia of observations that had accumulated without anyone to share them with, and the intersection of those two things created a kind of conversation that felt like exhaling after holding your breath for longer than you'd realized. She told him about the Titan court and its politics, which were as complex and human as any other court despite the scale of the participants. She told him about Themis, who was the only one among the Titans who had ever privately expressed something that might have been misgiving about Cronus's methods, though never loudly. She told him about the Sea Titans and the Titan of the Sun and the way they all maintained their autonomy through careful tribute and careful silence. He told her about the time before the Titans, when the first primordials were still figuring out what they were and the world was being assembled in real time from chaos and possibility. He told her about Gaia and the particular, territorial grandmotherliness she brought to watching the world develop. He told her about a mortal civilization that had flourished entirely underwater in a pocket of warm sea, in the age before his kind fully understood what mortals were, and how they had done extraordinary things with bioluminescent gardening, and how they had simply ended one day between one tide and the next, the way mortal things did. Doesn't it make you angry? Rhea asked once. They were on the mountain, and the night was very clear. Watching them end. It used to, he said. Now, it's more like what you feel when a piece of music ends. The ending doesn't unmake the music. She thought about this. I think I believed, when I was young, that power meant not having to lose things. Everyone believes that at first. And then? And then you find out that the things you love aren't protected by your power. They're just more visible to the things that want to take them. He looked at her. Which is terrifying. But also means the love was real. She was quiet for a moment. Hestia, she said. Hades. Demeter. They were real. Yes, he said. They were absolutely real. The birth happened in the deep of winter, in the heart of the mountain, in a chamber that the stone had been persuaded to open and that the warmth of old earth filled without fire. Naruto held the moment the way he had described, a specific, delicate, technically astonishing piece of work, the kind that required absolute focus and the particular expertise of someone who had been present at the beginning of things and understood precisely how life announced itself to the cosmos, and how that announcement could be muffled without the muffling becoming harm. The child came into the world without Cronus feeling it. He was loud immediately, which startled them both. A full-throated, indignant sound, as if he had been waiting in cramped quarters for too long and had opinions about it. He had a shock of dark hair and he was entirely himself from the first second, already looking around with dark eyes that seemed to be trying to take inventory of his situation and decide how to address it. Rhea held him, and her face was, Naruto looked away, because that moment was hers. But he heard the sound she made, and it was nothing like the careful steadiness she'd carried for centuries. It was something that had been waiting under all of it. Something that survived. He left her alone with her son for an hour, and stood outside the chamber door with his hand against the stone of the mountain, and felt the earth's patience all the way up his arm, and thought about choices and consequences and the way courage was not the absence of understanding the risk but the active decision to move forward anyway. When he came back she was composed again, though differently than before. The composure was not armor now. It was more like strength that had been fed. Zeus, she said. She was looking at the boy in her arms. His name is Zeus. The name moved in the air like a pronouncement. Like something the cosmos was noting down. Strong name, Naruto said. She looked up at him over the child's head, and her eyes were clear and exhausted and full of something enormous. Will he be all right? In Crete? Yes, he said. And more than all right. He paused. He's going to be very loud about it. Rhea looked down at her son, who was still making his general dissatisfaction with the world known in an increasingly specific and carrying way, and a smile broke across her face like the first light of a season changing. He has my stubbornness, she said. I wouldn't know anything about stubborn gods, Naruto said. She laughed, and it was the fullest sound she'd made yet, and the mountain seemed to settle around it the way the earth settled after a long-awaited rain. He arranged the stone. He wrapped it with the weight and shape and faint warmth of something newborn and gave it to her with the careful, practical focus of someone who had thought through every detail and found the solution elegant rather than impossible. She carried it back to Cronus. And Cronus, who was immensely powerful and bone-deep paranoid and ultimately, foundationally limited by the fact that he had never had to doubt his own control before, unwrapped it and swallowed it whole. Naruto stood on his mountain in the cold night air and felt the moment land in the wider world and felt, too, the small distant pulse of a child in Crete drawing his first breath in someone else's arms and finding it sufficient. He stood there for a while. The stars were very bright. The mountains were still growing, imperceptible and immense. He was not lonely, exactly. But he was aware that the world felt vivid tonight, and that it had something to do with a woman with her feet in the surf saying true things in the dark, and with a child who arrived in the world with opinions, and with the first genuine sense of forward motion he had felt in what might have been centuries or might have been longer. Interesting, he thought. Let's see where this goes. The wind moved through the peaks below him, and for a moment, just a moment, it sounded almost like music. Chapter 2, The Queen Who Doesn't Flinch. Olympus was not yet what it would become. This was early, the ink still wet on the Titanomarchy's conclusion, the dust from the last great battle still settling into the valleys below, the Titans who had fought against Zeus now locked in Tartarus with the sound of its ceiling echoing in everyone's memory. The mountain itself had been claimed more than built, its upper reaches transformed through the collective will of 12 gods who were still, in many ways, figuring out what 12 gods living together actually meant in practice. What it meant, mostly, was politics. He had watched Zeus grow, from a distance, the way you watch something you know will be significant. The boy had become, well. Loud was still accurate. He had become genuinely powerful and genuinely charismatic and genuinely infuriating in ways that suggested Rhea had been entirely right about the stubbornness. He had freed his siblings from their father's stomach, which was both heroic and deeply unpleasant for everyone involved, and he had fought a war across the whole of the cosmos, and he had won. And then he had done what powerful young men who had just won enormous wars tended to do, which was look around at the available options and start making decisions about the future with the absolute confidence of someone who had not yet learned what he did not know. He had chosen Hera. Or rather, and Naruto, who had seen enough of mortal and divine history to read the difference. Hera had been an inevitability that Zeus had arranged into the shape of a choice. Naruto came to Olympus because he was curious, and because he had made himself the kind of being who walked toward interesting things rather than away from them, and because Rhea had sent him something that was not quite a message and not quite a warning but was the feeling of her awareness touching his from a very great distance and communicating, in the wordless way that old beings could communicate, come and see. He arrived the way he always arrived everywhere, walking, on foot, from the base of the mountain, because he was not interested in the kind of entrance that made everyone stop and look. He had long ago found that invisibility was not about concealment but about manner. If you moved like you had always been there, like you were entirely unsurprised by your own presence, people extended you the same assumption. He walked through the outer courts of developing Olympus and was registered by the gods he passed as something, powerful, old, slightly uncategorizable, without being interrogated, because he had the specific quality of someone who was clearly not lost. The palace was extraordinary, he had to admit. Still being shaped, still half new, with the smell of construction and ambition wound together, but already showing the bones of something that would be genuinely magnificent. The stone was white and warm with the particular quality of rock that had been persuaded rather than forced into its current configuration, and the proportions were bold. Someone had taste. He found out whose taste it was approximately 4 minutes after entering the main hall. Hera was standing in the middle of a conversation that was not going well for the other party, who appeared to be a lesser divine functionary of some kind, something to do with cloud management, based on the uniform, who had made the mistake of explaining to the Queen of the Gods why something she had clearly decided should happen could not, in fact, happen the way she had decided it should happen. Naruto stopped at the edge of the hall and watched. He noticed this with the honest attention he gave everything, remarkable. Not in the way of simply being beautiful, though she was, in the specific, total way of someone whose physical presence was an expression of their nature rather than separate from it. She was tall, and she held herself with the kind of vertical certainty that was not arrogance but something older than arrogance, the simple refusal to occupy any less space than she was entitled to. Her hair was very dark and her eyes were a gray that shifted toward gold at the edges depending on the light, and she was currently directing the full force of those eyes at the cloud functionary with an expression of polite, devastating precision. "I understand," she said, and her voice was clear and cool and utterly controlled, "that the easterly systems make the south terrace drainage technically difficult. That is exactly why I'm asking you to solve it rather than describe it to me. The description I already have. The solution is what's missing." The functionary opened their mouth. "Before you tell me it can't be done," Hera continued, without raising her voice by a single degree, "I would like to point out that 6 months ago this mountain was unremarkable, and it is currently the seat of the known cosmos. The difficulty bar for can't be done has been substantially revised." The functionary closed their mouth. Made a small noise of agreement. Departed with the specific posture of someone who was going to figure out the drainage. Hera turned to find something and found Naruto instead. She looked at him for exactly 1 second with an expression that moved very quickly through surprise into assessment, and landed on the particular combination of interest and neutrality that very intelligent people wore when they encountered something they hadn't catalogued yet. "You're not from here," she said. Not a question. "No," he said. "You're not a petitioner. You don't have the posture." She looked at him steadily. "You're old. Very. Older than Zeus." Significantly. Something shifted in her expression, very subtle, the kind of shift you'd miss if you weren't paying attention. A recalibration. She was used to being in a room with the most powerful thing in it. He could see her running the new math and arriving at unfamiliar numbers. "Hera," she said. Not introducing herself, he knew who she was, and she knew he knew, and they both knew it. Naruto, he said. She waited for more and he didn't give it. He watched her note this with a slight narrowing of her eyes and the ghost of something that might, in a less controlled face, have been amusement. Rhea said you might come, she said. She was right. She usually is. She gestured toward a set of doors at the far end of the hall, imperious and entirely natural about it. Walk with me. I was going to inspect the east terrace, and now I find I have a problem to observe and a stranger to interrogate simultaneously. I can do both. He fell into step beside her, and they walked, and neither of them said anything for a moment, and he noticed that she was completely comfortable with that silence, not filling it, not performing ease but actually at ease, which was rarer than it should have been. Most people, even divine ones, could not tolerate silence with someone they had just met. Hera apparently found it a perfectly reasonable medium for gathering information. How do you know Rhea? She asked when they reached the doors and she pushed them open onto the east terrace, which was in fact having drainage issues he could see immediately in the way the stone had darkened with standing water at the south edge. We met before Zeus was born, he said. Hera looked at him sharply. He could see her doing rapid calculations. She never mentioned you. She wouldn't have. What I helped with was a secret that needed to be kept. Even from the people who benefited from it. A pause. They walked to the edge of the terrace, where the view of the world below was genuinely staggering, the sweep of land and sea from this height, early morning light painting the whole of it in copper and rose. Hera stood at the railing and looked out at it, and he stood beside her, and she said, "You helped her hide Zeus." It wasn't a question. Yes. The silence that followed was a different kind than before. He let her have it. She never told him, Hera said finally. That she had help. He thinks she did it alone. A pause. He believes his mother is the strongest being he has ever encountered, and he isn't wrong about her strength, but he doesn't have the full picture. The full picture is hers to give or not give, Naruto said. It's her story. Hera turned to look at him with an expression that was genuinely difficult to read, layered, guarded, and underneath the guard something that he recognized from Rhea's face on a dark rock, which was the expression of someone in the presence of an answer to a question they had been carrying for a long time and weren't sure yet whether to trust the answer. What is it you want here? She asked. Direct. No softness, no ceremony. Real. He liked her immediately for that. Same thing I wanted when I sat down next to Rhea on a rock, he said. Nothing specific. I go where things are interesting. This is interesting. I'm interesting. The understatement of the age, he said, and he meant it plainly. She looked at him for another moment. Then she turned back to the railing and looked down at the south edge of the terrace where the water was pooling, and something in her posture shifted, the queen setting down for a moment to let the person underneath come to the surface, just slightly, just enough. He is building something extraordinary, she said. Zeus. What he is building with Olympus, with the new order, it is genuinely extraordinary. Naruto waited. And I am the queen of it, she continued. The words were careful and steady and carried, if you listened for it, the precise weight of everything they were not saying. Which is exactly what I am. Exactly what I was always going to be. Is it what you wanted? She turned her head and looked at him sideways. He met her look without adjusting it. That is a bold question for someone I've known for 8 minutes. Should I wait until we've known each other longer? The ghost of a smile. Very brief, very real, gone before it fully arrived. You sound like Rhea. She told me I was strange. She told me the same thing. About herself, actually. Hera looked back at the view. She said you were the first person who had ever listened to her without trying to offer her something while they did it. I'm not offering you anything either, he said. No. She was quiet for a moment. That is, remarkably refreshing, actually. He stayed on Olympus for several weeks, which he hadn't entirely planned. It happened the way many things happened, gradually and then entirely, one day slipping into the next with enough reason to continue that continuing seemed more natural than leaving. He had a room that Hera had arranged with the specific decisiveness with which she arranged everything. It appeared, fully furnished, the morning after their first conversation, without discussion, because she had apparently decided he was staying and had moved accordingly. He found this delightful in a way he didn't examine too closely. He spent the days exploring the mountain and its developing infrastructure, which was genuinely fascinating from a construction standpoint, the negotiation between the gods' collective will and the physical nature of the mountain, the compromises and innovations required when 12 enormously powerful beings with different aesthetics had to share a space. He spent time with Poseidon, who was building his own claims and was cheerfully territorial about them in a way that was at least honest. He spent an afternoon with Athena, who was 20 years old in divine terms and already one of the most precise thinkers he had encountered in millennia, and who asked him approximately 47 questions about the pre-Titan cosmos with the focused appetite of someone who intended to understand everything. But most evenings he found Hera. It was not arranged. It kept happening the way things keep happening when two people have discovered that they are genuinely interesting to each other and the world keeps providing contexts. She walked the palace in the evenings, a habit she had developed early, an inspection of the building that was partly administrative and partly the thing people did when they needed to move in order to think. He started walking with her. Neither of them mentioned that this was a thing they were now doing. They just did it. He accumulated impressions of her the way you accumulated impressions of a very complex landscape. She was relentlessly intelligent, with the kind of intelligence that couldn't stop working even when it wanted to, that found patterns in everything and filed them away for later. She was rigorous about fairness in a way that was not softness but almost its opposite, a hard, clear-eyed insistence that what was correct regardless of who it benefited. She was impatient with inefficiency and completely patient with difficulty, which was a distinction not many beings managed. She was funny in a way that was entirely dry and entirely her own, a wit that appeared suddenly and then disappeared back behind the composure before you could be sure you'd seen it. And he came to understand this slowly, in pieces, genuinely lonely. Not the loneliness of isolation. She was surrounded constantly. The loneliness of someone in the middle of an enormous life who had no one to say the true things to. He understood that kind. He had carried it for longer than her entire existence. One evening, maybe 2 weeks in, they were at the west edge of the mountain where the terrace had been completed properly and the view took in the sea, and the sun was going down in the specific, extravagant way that sunsets had in this era before atmospheric particulates had figured out their eventual balance, and Hera said without particular preamble, "He loves me, you know." Zeus. "I imagine he does," Naruto said. "But he cannot stop." She was looking at the sea. "I don't know if it is the nature of what he is, or what was done to him, or simply what he chose. But he cannot stop reaching for more. More power, more," a pause. "He moves through women the way he moves through territory. Not maliciously. He doesn't think of it as cruelty. He thinks of it as expression of who he is." Naruto said nothing. "And I am the queen," she said. "So I stay. I am excellent at my role, which I chose, which I do not regret exactly. But..." She stopped. "But," he agreed. She turned to look at him, and the evening light was doing something extraordinary to the grey gold of her eyes, and she said with the specific precision of someone choosing honesty as a deliberate act, "I am furious, constantly, and I have no adequate outlet for it, and I am beginning to think that the fury is the most honest thing about me." "It is," he said. "The fury and the fairness. They're the same thing, actually." She blinked. "Explain." "You are angry because things are wrong. Not because of what they cost you personally, though they do cost you, because they are wrong. What Zeus does is wrong. The way it's accepted is wrong. The way your anger about it is treated as a flaw in you rather than a correct response to an incorrect situation is deeply wrong." He looked at her steadily. "Your fury is your judgment working perfectly. You just can't do anything with it yet." She stared at him. Something moved through her face that was too complex and too fast to fully catalogue. I have had this conversation with myself, she said finally. Many times. Usually I talk myself out of the anger. Why? Because what is the alternative? Burn everything down. Or build something, he said. Burn and build aren't the only options. What's the third? He considered. Wait. Understand exactly what you have and exactly what you're dealing with. Stop spending energy on talking yourself out of the truth. Let it be true, let it be yours, and then decide from a place of actual clarity what you want to do with it. A long silence. Below them the sea caught the last of the sun in flat sheets of copper. That sounds like patience, she said. It is patience. A different kind than the patience of endurance. What kind? The patience of someone who knows exactly what they are and is deciding how to use it. Hera looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked back at the sea. And then she did something he had not seen her do yet. She dropped the architecture of queenship entirely, just for a moment, and laughed in a way that was unguarded and a little helpless and completely her. It was different from the almost smiles and the ghost humor he'd seen before. It was real in the way that the things you can't help are real. You've been alive since before the mountains formed, she said. And you talk like a person. I have had very good teachers, he said. Eventually. She shook her head. Who are you? I've told you twice. You've told me your name twice. That's different. He smiled, and he didn't smile often, not because he was humorless but because smiling for him tended to be the genuine article rather than social currency, which meant it appeared when it appeared and not before. Ask better questions, he said, and I'll give you better answers. Her eyes narrowed, but she was still almost smiling, and she said, bold, for someone living in my mountain, and he said, my room is very comfortable, thank you for that, and she said, don't mention it, and the conversation turned, the way good conversations did, into something else entirely. Zeus found him eventually. He supposed it was inevitable. He came across Zeus in one of the outer training courts, where Zeus was doing the thing that very powerful young gods did when they had recently won enormous wars and still hadn't quite discharged all the energy, working through combat forms alone, with the focused intensity of someone who was not practicing but processing. There was lightning in it, the casual, half-conscious way Zeus generated it, little curls of it shedding off his movements like sparks off steel. Naruto sat on a low wall at the edge of the court and watched without announcing himself, and Zeus noticed him after about 2 minutes because Zeus's spatial awareness was very good and had been sharpened by several years of war. He stopped. Looked at Naruto with those dark eyes that did, now that Naruto could see them up close, have a quality that reminded him of Rhea, a depth behind the intelligence, something that ran under the surface of the enormous presence. He had the bearing of someone who had never spent a day in his life unsure that he would win, which was both impressive and concerning depending on what he was about to attempt to win. You're the one Hera's been walking with, Zeus said. That's one way to introduce a person, Naruto said. Zeus looked at him for a moment longer, then, and this was to his credit, Naruto thought, dropped the territorial response and crossed the court with a more open expression. He had something in him that was genuinely generous. It came and went, but it was real when it was there. I know you're old, he said. Older than the Titans. Yes. Older than me. Significantly. Zeus sat on a block of training stone across from him and looked at him with an expression of frank assessment. My mother trusts you. I know. She doesn't trust easily. I know. And Hera, he stopped himself. Looked at the ground for a moment, and in that moment Naruto saw the thing that was not usually visible behind the confidence, the specific insecurity of someone who had grown up knowing he was destined for greatness and had achieved it and found that achievement did not answer the questions he'd thought it would. He looked back up. Hera speaks to you like she speaks to herself. I have heard it from across the hall. Naruto said nothing. I don't know whether to be grateful or, Zeus stopped again. He had a habit of stopping himself that suggested he was more self-aware than he usually chose to let on. She is happier, he said. These weeks. She moves through the halls differently. She's sleeping better, Naruto said. And she's stopped rehearsing her own arguments internally before she has them with anyone. It's exhausting to maintain that kind of armor all the time. Zeus looked at him with an expression that was complicated and entirely honest. Did she tell you that? I inferred it. She told me other things. A long pause. The training court was quiet except for the wind. My mother said you helped her, Zeus said quietly. The night she brought me to Crete. She said she didn't do it alone. She did most of it alone, Naruto said. The part she couldn't do, I helped with. Zeus was quiet for a moment that was clearly not empty but full of something being processed. I didn't know, he said. She knows you didn't. She was happy for you not to. And now? Now I'm here and it came up. That's all. Zeus looked at him, and there was something in that look that was neither the territorial young king nor the boy processing his origin, but something in between and real. She carried that alone, he said. For years before I was born. The knowing. What my father was. A pause. What it cost her. Yes. I should have, he stopped. You couldn't have, Naruto said. You were a prophecy for most of that. Not a person yet. He looked at Zeus steadily. What you can do is know it now and let it matter. Zeus sat with that for a moment. Then he looked at Naruto with a different quality of attention, something more unguarded. Are you my friend? He asked. It was a strange question from a king. Exactly the right question. I'm not your enemy, Naruto said. The friend part depends on what you do next. Zeus looked at him for a long moment. Then something in him relaxed, not the loosening of a threat, but the settling of a person who has been given an honest answer instead of a diplomatic one and found it unexpectedly useful. Fair, he said. They sat in the training court for a while longer, and at some point Zeus started talking about the new order, the domains, the agreements with the sea and the underworld, the ongoing issue of what to do with the Titans who had stayed neutral in the war, the management of the mortal world that was growing with increasing speed and complexity. He talked the way someone talked when they'd been thinking hard about something for a long time and finally had a listener who they suspected would say something useful back. Naruto listened, and occasionally said something useful back, and thought, complicated. Deeply, genuinely complicated. Not evil. Not simple. Enormously powerful and enormously flawed and reaching, in whatever way he was capable of reaching, towards something he probably didn't have the language to name yet. He thought about Rhea, saying he has my stubbornness. He thought about the stone wrapped in warmth, descending into darkness. He thought, well. We'll see. He found Hera late that night in the great hall, alone for once, standing in the center of the room that was still being shaped with its pillars only half-formed and the ceiling open to the sky. She was looking up at the stars with her arms crossed loosely across her chest, not the defensive crossing, the comfortable one, and her expression was something he hadn't seen before. Something private and almost soft. It's going to be extraordinary, she said without looking at him, because she had heard him enter and had apparently decided not to remark on his presence further. When it's finished. This room. Yes, he said, looking up at the sky through the open ceiling. The stars were brilliant. I designed the proportions, she said. It was not boasting. It was a woman saying plainly, I made something. Zeus wanted it larger. I told him larger wasn't the same as more impressive, and if he made it larger I would leave a column out on the east side for spite. A pause. He agreed to my proportions. Smart man. Occasionally. She looked at him sideways. You spoke to him today. He found me. What did you think? Naruto considered how to answer that honestly and helpfully. He's better than he allows himself to be, he said finally. And more afraid than he shows. And he loves you in the specific, painful way of someone who cannot figure out how to be what the person they love needs them to be, which is the worst kind of loving. Hera's jaw tightened briefly. Then loosened. Yes, she said. That is exactly it. She was quiet for a moment, still looking at the stars. Do you know what it is like to be excellent at a life you didn't entirely choose? I know what it is like to choose a life and still find it lonely, he said. I think the feeling is similar. She looked at him. Really looked at him, the way she had the first morning on the East Terrace, but differently now, with 3 weeks of accumulated observation behind it, with the specific clarity of someone who has spent significant time in someone's presence and is now arriving at conclusions about who that person is. He let her arrive. You've been lonely, she said. Not pity. Recognition. For very long periods, he said honestly. What helped? He thought of a dark rock and cold surf and someone saying true things for the first time. Finding people worth talking to, he said. It didn't happen often. But when it did, he looked up at the open ceiling, at the stars. It reminded me what the point was. Hera was quiet for a long time. The hall was enormous and dark and alive with the sound of the mountain settling, the deep, patient sound of stone doing what stone did. When she spoke, her voice was lower than usual, the queen quality set aside, just a person talking in the dark. I think I have been waiting, she said, for a very long time, for someone to talk to who would not want something from me at the end of the conversation. I'm not going anywhere, he said. She looked at him. Something in her face that was not quite a smile and not quite something else but was entirely genuine. No, she said. I'm beginning to see that about you. They stood in the half-built hall under the open sky for a while longer, two very old and very complicated beings surrounded by the smell of new stone and ambition, and Naruto thought that the world was remarkably vivid tonight, and he was not surprised, and he was not afraid of what that meant. He had watched mountains grow. He knew what it looked like when something was building towards something else. He was paying attention. Chapter 3, What Titans Remember. Rhea came to Olympus on a morning when the clouds were sitting low and heavy against the mountain's upper face, and the whole of the peak was wrapped in a gray that made everything feel interior, private, like the world had drawn curtains. She arrived the way she always moved, without fanfare, without announcement, her presence registering first in the earth beneath the mountain, which recognized her the way old ground recognized old things and simply settled more deeply into itself in response. Naruto felt her coming about 20 minutes before she arrived. He was in the Eastern Garden, which was one of the newer additions to Olympus and still in the process of deciding what it wanted to be, half wild, half arranged, some kind of ongoing argument between Hera's aesthetic precision and the mountain's natural inclination toward dramatic verticality. He was sitting on a bench at the garden's edge with a cup of something warm and watching a bee, which should not have existed at this altitude, and therefore clearly had its own opinions about what was possible, investigate a flower that had appeared overnight in a crack in the stone. He was watching it with genuine attention because the bee's assessment of the flower was entirely focused and entirely committed, and he found that admirable. When Rhea stepped into the garden from the upper path, she looked older than when he had last seen her. Not in the way mortals aged. In the way that weight aged things, not the surface but the depth, something behind the eyes that had accumulated more of itself. She had been back in the world of titans and consequence and aftermath since Zeus had risen and the war had ended, and the aftermath of enormous things had its own specific gravity that pressed on even the strongest people. She saw him and her expression moved through several things quickly, landing on something that was simply relief. Real, uncomplicated relief. He understood that, he was someone she didn't have to perform anything for, and in a life full of performance that was a specific and precious kind of rest. You look settled here, she said, coming to sit beside him on the bench. Hera gave me a very good room. Rhea looked at him sideways with the knowing expression she had developed over the years of their acquaintance, the one that said she could see exactly what was happening and was choosing what to say about it. She chose to say, she likes you. She tolerates me with increasing warmth, he said. For Hera, that's devotion. Rhea looked at the garden. She designed this? Argument between her and the mountain. The mountain is winning the east corner. Rhea almost smiled. She reached down and touched the stone at the bench's base, and he felt the small, quiet pulse of her power moving into the ground and the ground responding, a conversation in a language older than words. She did it absently, the way you stretch a hand toward warmth, and it told him something about her current state. When she needed comfort she reached for the earth. When the earth reached back she was briefly, visibly steadier. Then she looked at him and the steadiness was not quite enough to cover what was underneath, and he said, "Tell me." She didn't ask how he knew there was something to tell. She just began. It came out in pieces, not linearly, the way serious things came out when you'd been carrying them long enough that they'd lost their sequential order and existed now only as weight. He listened without interrupting, which was what she needed, and he kept his cup warm between both hands and watched the bee finish its investigation and depart. The Titans who had survived, those who had stayed neutral, who had not fought for Cronus, who were now navigating the strange new world of Olympian order, were struggling. Not with defeat, the neutral ones had not been defeated in any personal sense. They were struggling with the aftermath of having spent centuries in a structure built on terror and then having that structure suddenly removed, which left a specific kind of disorientation that was almost worse than the terror itself had been. At least terror was legible. It told you exactly what to do. Freedom without framework was its own abyss. She had been working through them one by one. It was not a formal role. No one had assigned it to her. She had simply found herself doing it because she was the one who understood what they had survived and she could not watch them drown in the open water of a new era without at least trying to teach them to swim. "Hyperion," she said. "Titan of the sun." He sat with me for 3 hours last week and said almost nothing but kept reaching for the wall behind him, the way he did in the old court when Cronus was in the room. The way we all did. There was nothing behind him. He kept reaching anyway. She looked at her own hands. Reflex doesn't know that the danger is gone. "No," Naruto said. "It doesn't. Themis is the only one who seems, she's the most intact. But even Themis has nights." She paused. "She told me she still sets a place at her table for Cronus every morning, and then has to actively decide not to. Every morning. She's been doing it for 2 years." The bee came back. Naruto watched it land on a different flower. Rhea watched it too for a moment. "And you?" he asked. She didn't answer immediately. She looked at the garden, at the half-wild half-arranged argument of it, and her hands in her lap were still, the particular stillness she had that was not relaxation but choice. Choosing not to show what was moving beneath the surface. He recognized the choice. He had made it himself enough times. "I have been waiting," she said finally, "for the part where it stops. Where I stop waking up in the night certain that I can hear him. Cronus." His voice, the specific quality of it when he was displeased. She stopped. "It has been years. He is in Tartarus. His voice cannot reach me." She looked at Naruto. "But my body doesn't know that yet." He nodded. Just nodded. Because that was real and it was true and it deserved exactly what he gave it, full acknowledgement and no attempt to fix it. "I thought," she said, more quietly, "that when it was over, when the prophecy was fulfilled and he was gone, I thought the children would come home and I would feel what I had been unable to feel when they were taken, and everything would rearrange itself into something I could recognize as my life. My actual life." A long pause. "But they came home and I love them in the way that feels like a physical thing, a gravity, and also they are entirely strangers. They grew without me. They grew in stories I wasn't part of. Zeus grew in Crete and he is magnificent and he is a stranger with my stubbornness in him. Hera grew in the stomach of his father and she is—" Rhea stopped. Something moved across her face. "She is extraordinary, and she carries things I do not fully understand, and every time I look at her I feel the specific guilt of the person who could not protect them." "You did protect one," Naruto said. I know. Her voice went rough at the edges. I know. I replay that. I hold it. It is real. She shook her head slowly. But Hestia. And Hades. And Demeter, and Poseidon, and Hera. They were inside him. For years. And I was in the world, and they were. She pressed her hand flat against her sternum as if applying pressure to something. There is no framework for what that means. There are no words close enough. I swallowed them being swallowed every day I was in that court and every night I was in those halls, and I survived it by becoming someone who did not look at it directly. And now I look at it directly and I can't. She stopped. She was not crying. Her eyes were very bright and her jaw was set, and she was doing what she had done on the dark rock by the sea, operating on the far side of tears, in the ash-flat territory where everything had burned and the landscape was unrecognizable. Naruto set down his cup. He said, "You are allowed to not be all right about this." She looked at him. "I know that seems obvious," he said. "But sometimes the obvious thing is the thing nobody has said out loud yet. You are allowed to have survived it and still not be all right about it. Those are not contradictory. You don't have to be healed from something in order for your survival to be real." Her expression did something complex and slow, like continental drift happening at speed, something massive moving, grinding, the deep interior of her rearranging under pressure she had been holding off for longer than was reasonable. She breathed in through her nose, very deliberately. Breathed out. "I spent so long," she said, "telling myself that endurance was the same as strength. I remember. You told me that the first night. And you told me they weren't the same thing." She looked at him. "And I thought I understood what you meant. But I think I only understood it intellectually. I only believed it in theory." She paused. "I understand it in my bones now. What I did was not strength. It was survival. Survival is not shameful. But it is not the same thing, and I spent centuries treating it as though it were, because the alternative was acknowledging what the survival had cost." "What did it cost?" he asked. A silence that had genuine weight. Outside the garden the clouds shifted and a bar of pale light came through for a moment and lit the eastern corner where the mountain was winning its argument, all rough stone and resilient scrub that had no business being that high up and was thriving anyway. "Myself," she said simply. "I stopped being Rhea at some point and became the thing that endured what Cronus did. The vessel. The witness. And I told myself the witnessing was the same as existing, and it isn't, it absolutely isn't, and I am." She stopped. "I am 43 years old in terms of being a person again. I only started becoming a person again the night we sat on that rock." Naruto looked at her. She looked at him. And the look between them had in it the entire 43 years, the night on the rock and the months on the mountain and Zeus's birth and all the conversations on all the nights in between. And it had something else in it too, something that was not easy to name but was something like, "You are known here. Fully and specifically and without reduction." He said, "You are a person. You have always been a person. Even when Cronus was trying to make you something else. You were still in there." "How do you know?" she asked. Not challenge. Genuine need. "Because you named them," he said. "In the dark, with cold water on your feet, you said their names. Hestia. The fire sound. Hades with your eyes. Demeter with the green light. You named them to a stranger on a rock because they were real people to you and you needed them to be real to someone else too." He paused. "A vessel doesn't do that. A witness doesn't do that. A person does that. You were always still a person." Rhea looked at him for a long, long moment. And then she covered her face with her hands, the same gesture he had first seen when he found her on the rocks, but different now, not hiding, not containing, just needing somewhere to be for a moment, and she made a sound that was nothing like crying and nothing like relief and was somehow both of those things and more, the specific sound of a knot that has been pulled tight for so long that the releasing of it is almost indistinguishable from pain. He didn't move toward her. He didn't look away. He was present, fully and without agenda, which was the only thing that was needed. It lasted about 2 minutes. Then she lowered her hands and her face was rough and real and she said, "I apologize," and he said, "Don't," and she said, "Right, yes, you've told me before," and he said, "Many times, apparently," and the almost laugh came, genuine and exhausted and entirely itself. Hera found them still in the garden an hour later. She came through the upper entrance with the specific stride of someone in the middle of a morning full of things requiring attention, and she stopped when she saw Rhea, and the stop was entirely unconscious, a pause at the level of the body before the mind caught up. She looked at her mother-in-law with an expression that moved fast across her face, too fast to fully read, and landed on something careful and genuine. "You came," she said. "I said I would," Rhea said. Hera looked at her for a moment longer, taking in, Naruto thought, the quality of the morning that was evident in Rhea's face, the realness of it, the evidence of something having moved through and left its mark. She didn't comment on it. But something in her posture shifted toward Rhea very slightly, a few degrees in a direction that was warmer and less armored than her usual approach to the world. "I'll have food sent to the garden," she said. "The West Kitchen has started getting the flatbread right. It takes approximately 12 attempts and this was attempt 13 so they should have it now." "Hera," Rhea said. "Yes. Come sit down." A beat of something, surprise, briefly visible in the slight widening of Hera's eyes. Then the queen settled, and the person came forward, and she came and sat in the garden on the low stone across from the bench, and the three of them were arranged in the grey morning with the mountains argument going on in the corner and the bee apparently gone for the day. "He's been to see you," Hera said to Rhea. "Hyperion. Last week, yes. Have you seen him? He came to a session of the court 2 days ago and stood in the back the entire time and said nothing. I thought he was going to leave. He stayed for 3 hours. Hera paused. "At the end I asked if he had something to raise and he said no and then he said thank you, which I did not know what to do with. He needed to see it," Rhea said. "The new order. That it was real. That it held." She looked at Hera steadily. "He needed to see you in it and understand that the person at the center of the court was not, that the shape of it was different." Hera absorbed this. "Different from Cronus," she said. "Yes." Silence. The clouds shifted again and the bar of pale light disappeared. Naruto watched Hera navigate what she did with what Rhea had just said, which was complex because it required sitting with the comparison to Cronus, which was not a comfortable comparison for anyone in Olympus, where the wound of the Titanic age was still very fresh and very deep, and also with the implicit acknowledgement that what she was building was being watched by people who needed it to be something specific. People who were still flinching at sounds that weren't there. "He won't be Cronus," Hera said. Her voice was steady and not defensive, which made it more credible than defense would have. "Zeus. Whatever he is and whatever he isn't. He won't be that." "I know," Rhea said. Quietly, and meaning it. "Do you?" Hera asked. It was not accusatory. It was the honest question of someone who wanted a real answer. Rhea looked at her son's wife with the clear, direct gaze of someone who had spent years reading survival in people's faces and could see to the bone of things. "He freed them," she said. "He went into the stomach of his father and he brought them home. Everything else aside, he did that. And the things that are wrong with Zeus, and there are things that are wrong with him, they are the wounds of someone who survived something. Not the nature of someone who chooses harm." She paused. "I would know the difference." Hera was very still. The queen was entirely down, Naruto noticed, she had let it go without seeming to notice, as if Rhea's specific presence made the armor unnecessary. He watched Hera's face do something it didn't usually do, which was simply hold something painful without managing it, without directing it anywhere useful, just holding it. "He told me what he remembered," Hera said. "Of being inside. He only told me once. He said it was dark and it was loud, Cronus's heartbeat, enormously loud, and it was cramped and he could feel the others and they couldn't do anything but they knew each other was there. She stopped. He said he didn't tell me the rest of it. No, Rhea said. He wouldn't. I didn't ask him to. That was right. The two women looked at each other across the grey morning garden and something passed between them that Naruto understood was a kind of permission, Rhea to Hera, and Hera to Rhea, something bidirectional and quietly enormous. The permission to know each other as people carrying specific and unshared griefs rather than as roles in a story about a king and his family. He thought, there it is. There is what both of them needed and neither of them knew how to reach. He stood up. I'm going to go find that flatbread, he said. I'm going to eat it while it's warm this time. Rhea gave him the look she used when she found him both transparent and correct. Hera gave him a look he had come to recognize over the past weeks, which was her version of the same look but with more architecture, appreciation wrapped in amusement wrapped in something she hadn't categorized yet. He went and found the flatbread, and came back, and they ate it together in the garden while the clouds moved overhead and the mountain continued its argument in the east corner, and the conversation between the three of them shifted from weight to something lighter and then back and then lighter again, the natural movement of people who had found they could be various things with each other. The afternoon took a turn that none of them had planned for. They had moved inside, into a mid-level room that Hera used for informal meetings, not the throne room, not the great hall, just a room with a good table and wide windows and the kind of proportions that made it easy to breathe. They were still talking, which by now had a quality of having been going for hours and not wanting to stop, when the feeling arrived. Naruto felt it first because he was the oldest and his perception of the cosmos was the most broadly calibrated. It came as a pressure, not physical, not directed at any of them specifically, but a pressure in the fundamental texture of the world, the way sudden cold was a pressure before you registered the temperature. Something enormous had moved. Something had moved in the deep dark below the known world, below even Tartarus, in the space where the cosmos's oldest and most foundational forces kept their residence. He was on his feet before he'd decided to stand. Both women looked at him immediately. Hera's hand was at her side, where power gathered with the focused speed of someone trained to reflex. Rhea had gone very still in the way she went still when the earth was telling her something. What is that? Hera said. Not alarmed, sharp. The queen's voice, precise and prepared. Old, Naruto said. He was reading it the way he read the mountain's wind compositions, following the pattern of it, trying to get the shape. Very old. Older than the Titans. He paused. Older than me. That landed in the room with weight. Older than you, Rhea said. Not many things are, he said. Flatly, because it was just true. But the cosmos has basements that predate everything that thinks of itself as a god. Things that are less like beings and more like processes. Functions. Old hungers. He was still reading it. This one has been quiet. I haven't felt it move in, he calculated. It was a long calculation. In longer than the mountain range has existed. What woke it? Hera asked. I don't know yet. What does it want? He looked at her. He wanted to give her a careful answer, a useful answer, and the honest answer was the most useful one he had. It wants what things like that always want, he said. To consume. To bring the expansion back towards zero. It is the opposite of what I am. He paused. Think of it as, the cosmos breathes out, and what I am is the breath going out, the life, the growth. What that is the eventual breath in. Normally it doesn't stir until everything is ready to contract. It is not supposed to stir now. But it has, Hera said. But it has. Rhea stood. She pressed her hand to the floor through the table, the same way she'd touched the bench in the garden, and he watched the earth give her information and watched her face change as it did. It's moving along the deep fault lines, she said. Not toward the surface. Lateral. It's feeling for something. Feeling for what? Hera asked. Weakness, Naruto said. After the Titanomachy, after the sealing of Tartarus, the deep structure of the cosmos has fissures in it. Stress fractures from the battle. Something that had been contained behind the old walls of the world found them cracked enough to reach through. He was already calculating the shape of the thing, the direction of its movement, the kind of engagement it would require. He had faced things like this before, in ages so old that no current god had memory of them. He knew what he was doing. He also knew it was going to be serious. He looked at Rhea and Hera. They were both looking at him with clear, ready, entirely unfrightened expressions. He found this, he felt the specific warmth of it, the particular quality of people who were not running from the difficult thing, who were looking at it and asking what needed to be done. I need to go down, he said. Below Tartarus. To the fault line it's moving along. I need to address this at the source before it finds the particular fracture it's looking for. We're coming, Hera said immediately. He looked at her. Don't, she said, preempting whatever he might have said. Don't tell me it's too dangerous or too old or too anything. I am the Queen of Olympus and I am not sending you into the bones of the cosmos alone while I sit in a garden and wait. Rhea said nothing. She just looked at him with Rhea's look, which was the one that communicated both I agree with her and don't bother arguing, you won't win with great economy. He thought for a moment. Not calculating danger, danger was not the relevant variable. He was thinking about what the engagement would actually require, about what having them present would mean in terms of both capacity and risk, about the specific strengths of a Titaness of the earth and a Queen of Olympus when they were moving in the deep structural fabric of the world. All right, he said. But you follow my direction in the deep zone. Not because I don't trust your judgment, because I know the terrain and you don't. Agreed, Hera said, without a single moment's hesitation. Rhea nodded. The three of them left the room at speed, and the mountain felt them moving through it and shifted subtly, the way old places shifted for the old things that had invested themselves in them, and the garden with its ongoing arguments sat empty behind them, and the bee, which was definitely not supposed to exist at this altitude, came back and resumed its work, indifferent to cosmic events in the professional way of bees everywhere. They went down through the deep places of the world together, and the thing that was moving in the dark below felt them coming and stopped and turned its attention toward them, and what it found was not one ancient god but three. Naruto felt it register this. Felt it recalibrate. He had felt old hungers recalibrate before. They were not intelligent the way persons were intelligent, but they were not stupid either. They processed. They assessed. He stood in the deep fault line, in the dark that was a different quality than any surface dark, something that pressed back when you pushed against it, something that had texture and weight and the particular temperature of things that had never been touched by any light, and he looked into the reaching darkness ahead of him and he said, in the language that predated all other languages, the one that the cosmos understood in its structure rather than its consciousness, not yet. Not now. Go back. The hunger moved. Not away, not immediately. It pushed back, testing. It pressed along the fault line with the patient, relentless quality of water finding cracks, and Naruto felt the pressure of it and held his ground without effort, the way mountains held their ground, the way old things held their ground. He was what he was and he did not diminish in the face of old dark things. He expanded. He felt Hera on his left, her power a different quality than his, sharp and clear and organizational, the power of someone who made order from chaos, who looked at an unmapped territory and drew the lines that made it navigable. She was pressing that clarity against the fault lines, reinforcing them the way mortar reinforced stone, and she was doing it without being told because she had seen immediately what was needed and moved toward it. He felt Rhea on his right, her power deeper than the fault lines, older in its specific way than the mountain it ran through, the power of the earth that predated the gods who claimed it. She moved through the structural bones of the world the way she moved through a room she had known for centuries, with total familiarity, and she began to speak to the fractures that the battle had opened, not sealing them, you couldn't seal what the Titanomachy had broken, not entirely, but negotiating with them, persuading the stress points toward stability. The hunger pressed. Naruto pressed back. For a stretch of time that was not measurable in any standard way they held that line, the three of them, in the dark below the known world, and he was aware with the part of his attention that was not entirely absorbed in the engagement of how extraordinary it was, not the difficulty, not the danger, but the specific quality of being in this with people, with these two specific people, in the way that he had been in things alone for so long that the difference was not just tactical but almost physical. Like the difference between carrying something with your full strength alone and having someone else's hands on the other side of it. The hunger eventually recognized the futility of its current approach. He felt it make the assessment, slow, structural, without language, and he felt it begin to withdraw along the fault lines. Not gone. He was not foolish enough to think it was gone. It had retreated to the deep dark of the cosmos's basement, and it would wait the way that kind of thing waited, which was with something that functioned like patience in the same way that an ice age functioned like patience. But not tonight. Not through this fault line. Not while these three were standing in it. He turned to look at them. Rhea was still in contact with the earth, finishing something, making the last adjustments with the focused ease of someone who knew this work. Hera was already coming back to herself, the organizational clarity pulling back from the fault lines with the precise economy of someone who never used more than what was needed. There was a faint luminescence to her still, the residual light of what she'd done, which was quietly, substantially extraordinary. She looked at him. Her hair was loose from whatever had held it, and her expression was very clean in the way faces were clean after genuine effort, stripped of performance by the simple fact that something real had happened. "Is it gone?" she asked. "For now," he said. "It will need permanent attention. The fault lines need to be monitored and gradually sealed. It's a long project." "I can do the sealing," Rhea said, coming back from the earth. "The Titans who are neutral, some of them have earth aspects. I can organize a working." She looked at him. "It would give them something. Purpose in the new structure. Something that uses what they are." He looked at her. She looked at him. He was consistently struck by the quality of her thinking, not the intellect of someone who processed fast, but the wisdom of someone who processed deep, who saw around corners and through layers simultaneously. "That's better than anything I would have suggested," he said. "I have moments," she said, and there it was, the almost laugh, even now, even in the deep dark below the world, and he found he was smiling back at her before he'd decided to. Hera looked between them. Her expression was very still and very attentive in the way it was when she was filing something carefully. She said nothing about whatever she was filing. "Let's go up," she said. "I want light. And more flatbread." They emerged into evening. The clouds had moved on during their absence, and the sky was clear, and the stars were beginning in the east, and the mountain was solid beneath their feet, and the garden with its ongoing argument was exactly where they had left it, entirely indifferent to cosmic events. They sat in the garden because no one felt like being inside, and someone brought food and wine, and they ate and drank in the cooling evening with the stars coming out one by one overhead, and the conversation moved the way it moved when people have been through something together and come through it and are now on the other side of it in the warm, slightly disbelieving space of that happened and we're here. At some point Rhea said, "I have been alone with the heavy things for a very long time." Nobody said anything. Nobody needed to. "I am not used to this," she said. She made a gesture that encompassed the three of them, the garden, the evening. "Having it be distributed." "The weight?" Hera said. "The weight. And, the other parts. The good parts." She paused. "The bee that comes back." Hera looked at the empty flower patch that the bee had investigated. "I didn't know there was a bee," she said. "It shouldn't exist at this altitude," Naruto said. "And yet," Rhea said. "And yet," he agreed. Hera looked between them with the clear, perceptive gaze of someone who was putting a picture together with the specific patience of someone who wanted to be sure she had it right. She said, to Naruto, "How long have you known her?" "Since before Zeus was born." "And you didn't tell me." "It wasn't mine to tell." "As I said." Hera considered this with the fairness that was one of her most fundamental qualities. No, she said. It wasn't. She looked at Rhea. He didn't tell me anything about you except that you met and that he respected you. He told you that? Rhea said, looking at Naruto. You told me that the first night and I agreed, he said. Rhea looked at him for a moment, and the expression on her face was the one he had learned over the years to recognize as the expression of someone feeling genuinely, specifically valued, not generally, not in the abstract, but in the precise and particular way that meant they had been seen clearly and found worthy and the finding had been said out loud. It was a rare expression and she wore it briefly and it was entirely real. Hera looked at Naruto. Her expression was its own thing, layered and honest and, beneath the layers, something that was beginning to be its own version of the same. The stars were very bright. The mountain was very solid. The cosmos had been held at bay by three people who had stood in the dark together and found each other's presence genuinely useful, which was not nothing. It was, in fact, Naruto thought, precisely the kind of thing he had been alive long enough to understand was rare. He watched the stars multiply and the night deepen and the two women on either side of him talk in the easy, alive way of people discovering each other with genuine appetite, and he thought, all right. This is the point. The mountain composed something in the wind. He was almost sure of it now. Chapter 4, The Breath That Unmakes. 3 weeks after the fault line, the thing came back with company. Not the slow, lateral movement of before, that patient, feeling along the edges approach of something that was testing the structure's weak points. This time it came fast and vertical, driving up through the deep rock like a spear through water, and it brought with it a sound that was not sound in any conventional sense but that the body registered as sound, a frequency below hearing that made teeth ache and old stone crack and the very air feel suddenly thinner. Naruto was on the mountain's eastern face when it hit. He had been watching the sunrise, specifically the way the first light moved across the valley below in a wave, illuminating the dust motes and the dew and making the whole landscape briefly, blazingly visible in a way it wouldn't be again until the same time tomorrow. He had been thinking about Rhea, who had left Olympus 4 days ago to begin organizing the Titan earthworkers for the fault line sealing project. He had been thinking about Hera, who the previous evening had said something that made him laugh, a real laugh, the kind that arrived before permission, and had looked at his laughter with an expression he was still turning over. Then the thing hit and all of that went sideways. He was moving before the impact fully registered, dropping off the mountain's face in a controlled fall that became a run, heading for the mountain's base where the fault line network ran closest to the surface. Behind him he heard Olympus respond to the disturbance, the palace registering the hit in its stone, the gods inside feeling whatever they felt when the deep world moved, voices starting up somewhere in the upper courts. He hit the valley floor and kept moving and reached out with his perception the way you reached out a hand in darkness, trying to get the shape and the size and the direction. It was bigger than before. Significantly bigger. Either the 3 weeks had been time it used to gather more of itself into the available opening, or coming at the fault lines directly rather than laterally allowed it to express more of what it actually was. Either way, what was moving through the deep rock toward the surface was not a manageable pressure. It was a rupture event. It wanted to break through. He pressed his hand to the ground, both hands, flat on the earth, and spoke to the fault lines in the old language and told them to hold. The fault lines tried. Hera came down the mountain at a speed that suggested she had felt the hit too and had not stopped to ask anyone's permission about anything. She arrived at the valley floor with her power already fully deployed around her, the clear organizational force of it visible in the way the air moved differently in her immediate vicinity, ordered and purposeful, and she was in the traveling clothes she wore for movement, not the queen's formal architecture but something clean and practical, and her hair was braided back and her expression was the one Naruto had come to think of as Hera actual, as opposed to the curated versions she kept available for various audiences. She looked at his hands on the ground and looked at the ground itself and said, "It's much bigger." "Yes," he said without lifting his hands. "Can you hold it alone?" "No." She knelt beside him without another word and put her own hands on the earth, and he felt her power engage with the fault lines and begin doing what she'd done before, the organizational clarity, the drawing of lines in chaos, the reinforcement. She was very good at it. Better than she'd been 3 weeks ago, which made sense because she was Hera, and Hera apparently filed things away in the category of skills I should develop and then develop them. Rhea, she said. 4 days away. That's too far. Yes. They held the fault lines together and it was harder than before, significantly harder, the thing below pushing with a force that made the earth groan in the deep way it never groaned on the surface, the sound of something genuinely enormous encountering genuine resistance and deciding to push harder. Naruto felt it press against him in the personal way that old cosmic forces sometimes pressed, not intelligently, not with intent toward him specifically, but with the specific force of something that was his opposite, that pushed against the principle of him the way cold pushed against heat. He pushed back. He did not yield. We need Rhea, Hera said. Her voice was level and focused, not strained, but carrying the quality of someone doing serious work. I know. I've already called her. Hera glanced at him sideways. You called her? How? The way I called her when you needed me on the fault line the first time, Rhea's voice said from behind them, and they both turned to find her standing 20 feet back with her sandals in her hand and her feet bare on the earth, and her expression saying very plainly that she had not been 4 days away at all but rather a comfortable distance, monitoring, and had moved at speed when the hit came. Hera stared at her. You were close. I stayed nearby, Rhea said, walking forward and sitting cross-legged on the ground between them with the ease of someone settling into familiar territory. I had a feeling. She pressed both palms flat. Closed her eyes. And the earth responded to her the way the earth always responded to her, with something that was almost relief, the ground recognizing the specific being it had known longest and deepest and settling into a different quality of cooperation. Naruto felt the difference immediately. It was like the difference between holding something with your hands and bracing it with your whole body. Rhea's connection to the deep rock went down further than his hands-on-earth communication could go, further than the fault lines, down to the stratum below the stratum, to the place where the world's bones were, and from there she spoke to the structure in a language that was not the old language of the gods but something older, the language the earth had been using to talk to itself since before there were gods to observe it. The thing below encountered 3 simultaneous resistances and for the first time it stopped. Not retreated. Stopped. The difference was significant. It's thinking, Naruto said quietly. Things like that think? Hera asked. They process. It's not thought the way we mean thought. It's more like a river finding the shape of what's in front of it. It's calculating the path. Then we need to not give it a path, Rhea said without opening her eyes. Working on it. The 3 of them worked on it. The morning passed around them. The light moved across the valley and climbed the mountain's face, and the dew burned off, and the birds went about their business in the trees around the valley with magnificent indifference to the cosmic event occurring in the ground beneath them, and the 3 of them held the line below the line below the line and didn't move. It found the path at midday. Not through the fault lines, they had those sealed adequately. It found a different route, one that Naruto had not fully mapped because it ran through what should have been solid continental rock at a depth where geological movement was supposed to be a matter of millions of years, and it was not supposed to be navigable by anything. It came up through the river. Not the water itself, through the riverbed, through the deep substrate beneath the river valley, using the water above as something to aim toward. Water was life adjacent. Things that were the opposite of growth moved toward life the way darkness moved toward light, not to become it but to consume it. Naruto felt the moment it breached the substrate and his head came up and he said, "Move," with a very specific quality of voice that communicated urgency without alarm, and all 3 of them were on their feet and running before the instruction had fully registered. The river valley was half a mile east. They covered it in a time that had nothing to do with mortal physics. What was coming up through the riverbed was difficult to describe because it was not entirely a physical thing. It had physical aspects, the water over it was retreating, the fish in it were leaving the area at speed with the particular panic of animals encountering something their instincts had no framework for, and the riverbed itself was cracking along lines that made no geological sense. But the larger part of what it was existed as a quality of the air, a pressure on the mind, a specific feeling in the chest that Naruto recognized as the feeling of being in the presence of something that considered existence itself to be the problem. The two women stopped at the river's bank and he felt them assess it and he felt them hold their ground and he felt their power deploy around them and he thought, good. Exactly right. He walked to the water's edge. The thing below felt him approach and turn toward him the way it had turned toward him in the deep dark, that structural, processing reorientation, and he looked at where it was working its way through the riverbed and he felt the cold logic of it, the absolute primordial certainty that everything which had grown would eventually be consumed, that expansion was always temporary and contraction was always inevitable, that what he was a delay and what it was the conclusion. He found this annoying in the specific, considered way that he found genuinely wrong things annoying. He reached down into the water. Not physically, he reached down with what he was, with the principle of him, the thing that had existed since before the Titans and expressed itself as the insistence that things grow and life mattered and the broken healed. He reached down and he found the place where the thing was pushing through and he pressed against it with everything he had. The water in the river lit up. Naruto had not been showing his power in any particular way since arriving on Olympus, not hiding it, but not expressing it, because expression for its own sake had always struck him as poor taste. But this required expression. He let what he was come forward, fully and without reduction, and what it looked like from the outside was the river going golden from bank to bank, every drop of water suddenly luminous, and the light going down through it into the depths and filling the cracked riverbed and pressing into the substrate and down and down and down until it found what was rising and stopped it cold. He heard Hera make a sound behind him. Not fear. Something else. He pushed. The thing pushed back. And for a moment that felt larger than its actual duration, it was simply the oldest two things in the cosmos pressing against each other in opposite directions with the fundamental, irreconcilable disagreement of what they were. Then he pushed harder and it retreated. Not to the deep baseline. Not to the patient waiting place. It retreated to the mid-depth, to the damaged area of the fault lines, because the fault line project was not complete and there was still weakness there, and it gathered itself there with the processing stillness of something that had revised its strategy. Naruto stood at the water's edge and the golden light faded out of the river until the water was just water again, and the fish gradually, tentatively, began to return, and he stood there for a moment with everything he was still fully present and fully extended because he wanted to be certain it was not going to make another immediate move. It didn't. He turned around. Hera was looking at him. She had her arms at her sides and her power fully deployed still and her expression was, he had been cataloging Hera's expressions for weeks now and this one was new. Not surprise exactly. Surprise was the first register. What it had moved to was something more complex, a reassessment so total that it had temporarily pushed everything else off her face and left it clean and open in a way he had seen from her only a few times, only in the genuine moments. Rhea was looking at him too, and her look was different, the look of someone who had always known what he was but was seeing it fully expressed for the first time. There was something in it that was very close to grief and very close to relief, which made a kind of sense, because Rhea had spent a very long time in the presence of enormous power that was used to harm, and seeing enormous power used to protect something had a specific, complicated resonance. You, Hera said. Her voice was different. Not performing anything. What are you? I told you, he said. Older than the categories. Show me the categories and then I'll tell you if you fit them, she said, and it was so entirely herself, so Hera, the precision of it in the middle of a river that had just been lit from within by the most ancient thing either of them had ever been in close proximity to, that he felt something move in his chest that was warm and specific. He walked back to the bank and she did not step back when he came close, because she was Hera and Hera did not step back from things. She looked up at him with that clear, open, reassessing gaze and he met it directly. The fault lines are still compromised, he said. We have time but not unlimited time. We need to complete the sealing project. I know, she said. I will organize the Olympian side of it. I can have the Titan team ready in 2 days, Rhea said, coming to stand beside them at the water's edge. I was already in contact with 6 of them. After this morning I suspect all of them will want to help. They felt that. Anything that old and that large, every earth-sensitive being on the continent felt it, Naruto said. They stood for a moment at the river's edge, the 3 of them, with the water moving normally around their feet and the birds back in the trees, the world reassembling itself around what had just happened. There was a quality to the air in the aftermath of a serious thing held, a specific clarity, a high-definition quality to sound and color, the world slightly more itself than usual. Hera sat down on the riverbank. Not queenly, not performed. Just, sat down on the grass, which was still slightly damp, and put her hands in her lap and looked at the water. He sat beside her. Rhea sat on her other side and the 3 of them sat in the afternoon with their feet near the water and the sun warm and everything very quiet. That was, Hera started. Stopped. Started again. I have fought in large engagements. I have engaged with things that were very powerful. A pause. That was different. Different how? Naruto asked. It felt like arguing with the conclusion of everything. She said it plainly and he thought, yes. That is exactly the description. Like trying to convince a mathematical proof to be wrong. She looked at him. And you just, told it no. I've been telling it no for a very long time, he said. She held his gaze. How long can you keep telling it no? Longer than any of us need to worry about, he said honestly. The cosmos isn't ready to contract. It's still very young by the standard of these things. What happened today was an anomaly, the Titanomachy cracked the structure and gave it an opportunity it shouldn't have had for epochs. He paused. Once the fault lines are sealed it goes back to waiting. And I've dealt with its waiting before. Alone, Rhea said. Quietly, from his other side. He didn't answer that immediately, because the honest answer was yes, always alone, because that was what he was, what he had been for longer than either of them could fully conceptualize. And because that answer had felt entirely natural for most of that time and only recently, very recently, in cosmic terms, had started to feel like something worth reconsidering. Yes, he said. Alone. Rhea looked at him with the particular look she used when she was allowing something she already knew to become fully real. Hera looked at the river. Not today, Hera said. No, he said. Not today. They sat with the water moving past them and the afternoon deepening around them and none of them said anything else for a while, because nothing else needed to be said right then. The thing had been faced and held and what remained was the simple, grounded fact of being on the right side of it together, which was its own kind of thing. The planning started that evening and ran through the night. Hera's great hall had been commandeered entirely, the table covered in maps that she had apparently drafted at some point without mentioning it, detailed representations of the known fault line network that she had synthesized from the Olympians' geological surveys and her own perception during the previous 2 engagements. She stood at the table's head in the candlelight with the map spread before her and directed the discussion with the specific economy of someone who had been born to run rooms like this and had been doing it since Olympus was new. Naruto sat to her right with his feet up on the table, which she had looked at once and decided not to address. Rhea sat across from him, her hands moving over the map's fault line notations with the small, constant reading she did with everything Earth-related, correcting placements, adding details the surveys had missed. 3 of Zeus's senior attendants sat at the table's far end, taking notes with the focused competence that Hera demanded from everyone in her household, and a Titan by the name of Epimetheus, younger than the major Titans, brother of Prometheus, one of the neutral ones who had come to Rhea already, sat beside Rhea and contributed occasional, hesitant but accurate Earth sense observations. Zeus was not present. He was handling something in the eastern reaches, some domain dispute between minor sea gods and coastal nymphs that had apparently become urgent. He had sent Hermes with a message saying he was aware of the morning's event and trusted Hera's management of the response, which was, depending on how you read it, either a genuine expression of confidence in his wife or a convenient absence at a difficult moment. Naruto had his own interpretation. He kept it to himself. The primary vulnerability is here, Hera was saying, pointing to a node on the map where 4 fault lines converged, and here. The convergence points are where the pressure differential is highest. We seal these 2 first and we reduce the available force by, she looked at Naruto. Approximately 70%, he said. 70%, she confirmed, as if she'd expected that number. The secondary points follow in this order. She mapped the sequence with precise movements, and Naruto watched her and thought about what she was doing, which was taking a geological and metaphysical problem of enormous complexity and finding its internal logic and building a response from there. She was not a healer of the earth, not an earth aspect at all, and yet she had synthesized everything she'd learned in 2 engagements and 1 full night of planning into something that was going to work. Rhea was watching her too. Watching with the warm, complicated attentiveness she turned on the people she was coming to genuinely trust, which was a small and specific group, and she did not add to it carelessly. Her regard for Hera had been shifting throughout the weeks on Olympus, from the respectful wariness of a Titaness engaging her son's powerful wife, towards something more personal and more direct. Something that looked, increasingly, like genuine recognition. Hera looked up from the map and found them both watching her and said, with a small, dry precision, "I assume you have corrections." "No corrections," Naruto said. "It's right." Rhea said, "The sequence is exactly right. I would have started at the same nodes." She paused. "Where did you learn to read fault lines?" "Today," Hera said. "Under somewhat pressured conditions." Rhea's expression moved toward that almost laugh. "Today," she said. "I don't see a reason to learn things slowly if quickly is available," Hera said, and went back to the map, and Naruto watched Rhea's expression settle into something that was genuine warmth, freely given, without the work she used to have to do to give it. The planning ran until the early hours. Epimetheus turned out to have a very precise knowledge of the deep fault network in the eastern quadrant that filled in significant gaps, and Hera received that knowledge with the particular graciousness she showed when someone genuinely useful offered something, not effusive, not performing gratitude, simply incorporating it and acknowledging the contribution clearly, which made Epimetheus straighten in his seat with the expression of someone who has not recently been treated as though their knowledge mattered. Naruto noticed this. He noticed all the small things Hera did that accumulated into something larger than any individual instance. The way she made the room functional by making every person in it feel specifically useful. The way she never confused efficiency with coldness. The way she held the map of everything in her head and still tracked the people around the table as individuals with individual weight. He thought about what she had said on the East Terrace, weeks ago. "I am the queen." Which is exactly what I am. Exactly what I was always going to be. He thought about how she had said it, not bitterly, not with resignation, but with the particular steadiness of someone who had made a choice with their eyes open and lived it fully while still knowing what it cost. He thought about how she had knelt in the valley and pressed her hands to the ground and reinforced the fault lines without being asked, with the competence of someone who had been thinking about exactly this for 3 weeks. He thought, she chose this life. And she is making it into something specific and real and hers. That is not nothing. That is, in fact, remarkable. He looked at the table and the maps and the candlelight and Rhea's hands moving over the fault line notations and Hera directing from the table's head with that luminous, forceful clarity, and he felt something that was not the familiar, gentle vividness he'd been noticing for weeks. This was sharper. More specific. A more identified feeling about a more identified cause. He looked at the table and thought, oh. There it is. He looked at Hera, and then at Rhea, and thought, both. Somehow. Both. He was old enough not to be surprised. He was old enough to know that the heart did not do the tidy thing and it was not worth requiring it to. He was old enough to know that what he was feeling was real and what he was going to do with it was nothing, yet, except be honest with himself about it, which he had always considered the foundational requirement. He put his feet down from the table and leaned forward and said, "The sequence is right, but we need to consider the timing. The thing below will feel the ceiling begin and it will push against the first node as we work it. We need to be fast enough at the first node that we've secured it before the pressure becomes structural again. How fast is fast enough? Rhea asked. An hour, he said. Maybe less. I can work faster than that, she said. I know. But you'll need the Titan team with you for the secondary nodes, and getting 6 Earthworkers synchronized takes time you won't have once you've started. Then I start the synchronization now, she said, and stood, and looked at Hera. I need somewhere quiet and not underground. The North Garden, Hera said immediately. It's empty and the earth there runs shallow to the substrate. Rhea nodded and left without ceremony, which was entirely like her, and Naruto heard her footsteps down the corridor and then nothing, because she moved quietly when she chose to. Hera looked at the attendants. That's enough for tonight, she said. We start at dawn. They gathered their notes and left, and Epimetheus left with a quietly overwhelmed expression of someone who had come expecting to help seal some fractures and had ended up in a room with the 3 most unsettling beings he had ever encountered, which was saying something given that he was a Titan. The hall was empty. The candles had burned lower. The maps were still spread across the table with Rhea's small corrections written into the margins in her particular hand, precise and slightly hurried, the handwriting of someone whose thoughts moved faster than the pen. Hera stood at the table's head and looked at the maps for a moment longer. Then she looked at him, and he was looking at her, and they were the only 2 people in the room, and the candlelight was doing the thing it did in rooms with good proportions, making everything a little more itself. You were magnificent today, she said. Plainly. Not flattery, just a true thing stated with the directness she applied to all true things. We were, he said. She shook her head. You. At the river. She looked at him with those gray-gold eyes that he had been reading for weeks and was still discovering. I have been the most powerful thing in most rooms I've entered since Olympus was established. Today I understood what it means to be in the presence of something genuinely older. She paused. It was not frightening. No. No. It was, she searched for the right word with the precision she applied to language. Clarifying. Like finding a fixed point. She looked at him steadily. You are a fixed point. He met her eyes and held them and felt the warmth of what she'd said move through him in the specific way that real things moved. He said, you are not a fixed point. You are something better. You are a direction. Her expression moved, something opened behind it, very briefly, something that was younger than her queenship and older than her role. Something that was simply Hera, the person, encountering something she wanted and not yet knowing what to do with the wanting. I should check on Rhea, she said. Yes, he agreed. She gathered the maps with efficient movements. At the hall's door she stopped and looked back at him over her shoulder. Will you be insufferably calm tomorrow, she asked. During the sealing. When it gets difficult. Almost certainly. Good, she said, and there was the ghost smile, fully realized tonight, actually arriving on her face rather than stopping short of it. It's incredibly useful. She left. He sat in the candlelight with the empty hall and the burned-down candles and thought about fixed points and directions and the specific, personal weight of caring again after so long. It was worth it. It had always been worth it. The dawn came cold and clear and they went down into the deep places again, all 3 of them, and the Titan team Rhea had synchronized through the night came with them, and they worked the fault lines from dawn to midday with the thing below pushing against them the entire time, and Hera held the primary node through sheer organizational force while Rhea worked it closed and Naruto stood between the thing below and the workers above and was immovable. The primary node sealed. The pressure dropped significantly, exactly as calculated. The secondary nodes followed in sequence, each faster than the last as the team found their rhythm, Rhea moving between them with the practiced efficiency of someone born for exactly this, Hera mapping the progress and redirecting force where the lines tried to split. The last node closed at midday. The thing below retreated to its baseline and the structure of the world settled back into something that was not perfect. The Titanomachy had done real damage that would take longer to fully address, but was stable and functional and no longer an immediate aperture for the cosmos's appetite. Naruto stood in the deep dark with his hands on sealed stone and felt the silence of the thing's absence from the upper fault lines and breathed out slowly. Long exhale. The specific quality of a breath released after an engagement that had required all of what you were. Rhea's hand found his shoulder in the dark. Not grabbing, not clutching, just present. The specific warmth of a hand that knew him. Hera's voice from a few feet away, level and real, done. Done, he confirmed. They came back up to the light together, all 6 of the Titan team and the 3 of them, emerging into the midday sun of the valley with the river running clear and normal beside them and the birds doing their indifferent work in the trees. The Titans stood in the light with expressions that ran the full range from exhausted to quietly overwhelmed to something that was in the territory of, we did something. With our strength. In the new world. Something that mattered. Epimetheus caught Naruto's eye and nodded once, a simple acknowledgement, and Naruto nodded back. Rhea organized the Titans back toward Olympus for food and rest with the brisk, maternal efficiency she applied to beings who needed hurting and wouldn't respond well to being told they needed hurting. They went. She watched them go and then looked back at him and Hera standing by the river with the sun on them and the water at their feet, and her expression was many things at once, exhaustion, satisfaction, something bigger than either that she was deciding how to hold. We should all sleep, she said. But I want to say something first. They looked at her. I have been alive for an extremely long time, she said. And I have not often been part of something that felt, she looked for the word with Rhea's particular habit of choosing words correctly. This. What this feels like. She looked between them both. I don't have a better word than this. I know, Naruto said. So do I, Hera said. Her voice was quiet and the queen was down and there was just the person, standing in the midday sun by a river that had glowed golden that morning and was now simply itself, saying something she meant. They stood there, the 3 of them, in the aftermath of something serious and the middle of something that was still becoming clear, with the sun warm and the water moving and the cosmos, for the moment, breathing normally. He felt the vividness of it. Bright and specific and fully his. He thought, there is no going back from this, and I don't want to. The mountains were still growing, somewhere. Patient and immense and entirely themselves. He thought he understood, now, what they were composing. Chapter 5, What Queens Carry. Zeus came home on a Tuesday. Not that anyone was calling days Tuesday yet, that naming was epochs away, but there was a quality to the particular afternoon he returned that was distinctly Tuesday, meaning it arrived with the slightly deflating energy of an interruption to something that had been going well without it. Naruto was in the garden when he heard the thunder announce Zeus's return the way thunder always announced Zeus, not because Zeus was trying to be dramatic but because he generated it unconsciously, the same way some people couldn't enter a room quietly no matter how they tried. The mountain registered his arrival in its stone, and the palace came alert in the specific way it did when its primary occupant returned to it, and Naruto ate the last of his flatbread, warm this time, he had successfully managed warm flatbread 3 days running, and thought, here we go. He stayed in the garden. He was not avoiding anything. He simply had no reason to go in yet. Rhea had been on Olympus for 11 days now since the sealing. Technically she had her own establishment, all the senior Titans did, their own halls and the ranges they were associated with, but she had stayed, and nobody had commented on her staying, and the 3 of them had fallen into something that had the quality of a rhythm. Morning in the garden. Meals at the table in the informal room. Evenings that extended later than intended because the conversations were not willing to end on schedule. The fault line project continuing its long, careful work, though the crisis pressure was off it now. It was the most sustained domestic normalcy Naruto had experienced in longer than he could comfortably quantify. He was aware this was about to get complicated. He heard Zeus find Hera before he heard anything else, because Zeus's voice carried and Hera's voice when responding to Zeus had a specific quality that was different from her other registers, tighter, more constructed, the queen coming fully forward as a kind of armor in the way that it sometimes functioned. He couldn't make out words. He didn't need words. The pattern was legible. Then he heard Zeus's voice change quality, from the return energy, the expansive warmth of someone arriving home, to something quieter and more specific, and he thought, he's asking about me. He continued sitting in the garden. Rhea appeared from the upper path about 20 minutes later with her sandals in her hand as usual and sat beside him on the bench without preamble. She looked at the east corner of the garden, where the mountain was still winning its argument, and she said nothing for a moment. "He knows you're here," she said eventually. "He knew I was here before he left. He knows you've been here the whole time he was gone." She paused. 11 days. Yes. She turned to look at him with the clear, direct gaze that cut through everything unnecessary. "He's going to want to talk to you." "I imagine so. What will you tell him?" Naruto thought about this honestly, which was the only way he thought about anything. "The truth," he said. "Which is that I care about his wife and his mother and I'm not going anywhere, and that his feelings about that are real and worth engaging with, but they don't change the facts." Rhea was quiet for a moment. "He won't like it." "No. He'll push. He can push." She looked at him. Then something in her face moved toward the almost laugh, softer than usual. "You know," she said, "I spent years after his birth wondering what kind of man he would become. I imagined all the versions. I never imagined the version where I would be sitting in his wife's garden with an ancient primordial god and saying he can push about my own son." "Life is surprising," Naruto said. Consistently, she agreed. They sat together in the warm afternoon and the east corner went about its business, and somewhere in the palace the conversation between Zeus and Hera continued its specific, careful navigation. Naruto felt the shape of it from a distance, the way you felt weather coming, not the content, just the quality of the pressure. Hera was not giving ground. Zeus was not escalating, which was to his credit. They were doing the thing that marriages in complicated states did, which was conducting a negotiation in the language of a conversation about something else. Rhea said, "She's different." "Since when?" "Since before I arrived 11 days ago. I noticed it immediately." She looked at the garden. "She moves through the palace differently." "Not more relaxed." Hera doesn't relax, exactly, she recalibrates. "But she moves through it like someone who has remembered that the palace belongs to her too, not just to the role she performs in it." A pause. "You did that." "She did that," he said. "I was just present while she did it." "Don't be modest. It doesn't suit you, you're far too old for it." He almost smiled. "She talks about you," Rhea said. "Not obviously. But she does. She'll say something in conversation, about patience, or about what things look like from a sufficient distance, and I'll hear you in the structure of the thought. She's been carrying your perspective around and trying it on things." She looked at him sideways. Which is extraordinarily high praise from Hera, for whom most other perspectives are noted and then filed under interesting but ultimately insufficient. "I know what you're saying," he said. "I know you know. I'm saying it anyway because I think you should hear it clearly." He turned to look at her. She met his gaze with the openness she had grown into over the years of knowing him, no performance, no management, just Rhea, the actual person, with all her weight and warmth and hard-won clarity. "And you?" he said. "Me," she said. It was not a question. "What are you carrying around?" She was quiet for a long moment. Below the bench the earth did its patient thing and she felt it, he could see her feeling it in the slight, almost imperceptible settling of her posture. She said, "I came here 11 days ago because the fault line project needed my attention and because I wanted to see how you both were after the sealing." A pause. "I have stayed 11 days because I don't want to leave. Which is a feeling I have not had about a specific place since before Cronus. Since before I learned that staying meant exposure and exposure meant loss." She looked down at her hands. "I'm sitting in a garden on Olympus, which is my son's mountain and my daughter-in-law's home, and I feel that it could be mine too. In some sense. In the sense that belonging can be built between people rather than assigned by geography. Yes, he said. It can. She looked at him. You've been building this kind of belonging for as long as I've known you. I've been learning how to, he said honestly. I was alone for a very long time before I understood that choosing connection was not the same as losing the self. I thought for a long time that caring meant becoming smaller. That if you let people matter to you it would, reduce you, somehow. Make you more fragile than what you were. And then I met you on a rock, he said simply, and the world got more vivid, and it kept getting more vivid, and I am exactly as large as I was and also nothing like I was, and both of those things are true simultaneously. Rhea looked at him for a moment that had genuine weight. Then she said, I have been in love with the idea of someone seeing me clearly for so long that I had started to confuse the idea with the real thing. She met his eyes directly, the way she did when she was saying something that cost her something to say. You see me clearly. You have from the first night. And it is, I am not confused about what it is. The garden was very quiet. The east corner went on with its argument. Somewhere a bird moved through the upper branches of the one stubborn tree that had taken root at the mountain's edge and had no business being that healthy at that altitude. He reached over and took her hand. Just that. Just her hand, which was warm and real and had pressed flat against the bones of the earth to hold back the appetite of the void, and he held it and she let him and neither of them said anything else because there was nothing else that needed saying right then. Zeus found him an hour later. He came into the garden alone, without Hera, which told Naruto something about how the preceding conversation had gone, that Hera had either sent him or he had come independently, and that either way she had not tried to prevent it. Zeus in the garden was different from Zeus in the throne room or Zeus at the training court. He looked like himself in an unmanaged way, the king-bearing set aside, and what was left was a tall, dark-eyed man who was 30 years old in any terms that meant anything about experience, who had grown up knowing he was a prophecy and had spent his whole life catching up to it and was still catching up. He looked at Naruto and then at the bench where Rhea had been sitting and then at the east corner and then back at Naruto. She went inside, Naruto said. I know. Zeus sat on the low stone where Rhea usually sat, because apparently this garden had assigned seating now. He put his forearms on his knees and looked at the ground with the expression of someone running several things simultaneously and trying to get them in the right order. Then he looked up. I'm not here to threaten you. I know. Or to tell you to leave. I know that too. I'm not sure I could make you leave even if I wanted to, Zeus said, which was honest and self-aware in a way that Naruto appreciated. You were here before I was anything. You were here before this mountain existed. He looked at the east corner. My mother trusts you more than she trusts anything. Hera, he stopped. Something moved across his face. Hera is different. You did something. She did something, Naruto said. I was present while she did it. Zeus looked at him sharply. You're the third person to make that distinction. It's the right distinction. She said something similar. He was quiet for a moment. She said, he stopped again, working at something, and Naruto watched him do the working because it was real work, not performance, and it mattered. She said she has felt, since I brought her here, like a function. Queen. Wife. Mother of the Olympian structure. She said she lost track of just being a person. Hera, specifically, as distinct from the role. He looked at Naruto directly. She said talking to you reminded her what that felt like. Naruto held his gaze and didn't say anything. I should have been the one to remind her, Zeus said. There was no self-pity in it. Just honest recognition. I know that. I'm aware of I know what I am and what I'm not. I have never been good at the specific thing of seeing someone who is right beside me. I see enormous things. I manage enormous things. The person in my bed, he stopped. I lose that focus. Yes, Naruto said. I've hurt her. Yes. And my mother. Both of them. Yes. Zeus looked at him with the expression of someone who has asked a question and received exactly the answer they wanted and exactly the answer they dreaded simultaneously. Are you going to tell me to do better? Would it help if I did? Probably not. Then I won't. Naruto leaned back on the bench and looked at the sky, which was very blue and very straightforward in the way that honest things were. You already know what you've done. You already know what it costs. The knowing isn't the problem. Then what is? He considered. You freed yourself from the stomach of a god, he said. But the shape of the space you were in, you kept the shape. You built Olympus in the same shape as your father's stomach. Everything contained, everything controlled, nothing escaping. He looked at Zeus. Not the same motivation as Cronus. Not fear of prophecy, not cruelty. But the same architecture. Zeus was very still. His face had gone through several things and come to rest on something that was not comfortable but was genuine. My mother said something like that to me once, he said. Less directly. She's more patient than I am. A brief sound that was almost a laugh. Yes. Zeus looked at the ground. What do I do with that? You already know. I know what needs to change. I don't know if I can. He said it plainly, without deflection, and it cost him something to say it. I don't know if the capacity is in me. Naruto looked at him steadily. That's the most honest thing you've said. Is it useful? Yes. Knowing the actual problem is more useful than knowing the solution to the wrong problem. He paused. You freed your siblings. You built something here. You ended your father's rule. You are not a small person, Zeus. You are a person with a specific wound that runs in a specific direction, and you have been using your enormousness to avoid looking at it. He let that sit for a moment. That's all. Zeus sat with it. The garden sat with him. The east corner continued its argument. Do you love them? Zeus asked eventually. His voice had changed, quieter, stripped of the king quality. Naruto didn't insult him by asking who he meant. Yes, he said. Both of them. Both. Zeus looked at the garden. Yes. A long silence. Naruto let it be long. There was nothing to manage in the silence. Zeus was deciding what he was and what he wasn't, and that was his work to do and nobody could do it for him. She's my wife, Zeus said finally. Not threatening. Not territorial. Just, stating the real, complicated thing. I know, Naruto said. And she is also a person who has been lonely inside that, and I am someone she talks to, and those two things are all true at once. Zeus looked at him. And Rhea is my mother. Yes. And she is also a person who survived something enormous alone for centuries, and she deserves to not be alone, and those two things are also all true at once. Another long silence. Zeus stood, eventually, and walked to the garden's edge and looked out at the view that opened beyond it, the wide, extraordinary view of the world below that this height afforded, the sweep of land and water and the distant blue of the furthest sea. He stood there for a moment with his hands at his sides. I don't know what to do with you, he said. I know, Naruto said. That's fine. You don't have to know yet. Zeus turned back to him with an expression that was complicated and real. If you hurt them, either of them, I won't. You sound certain. I am certain. Not arrogance. Not performance. Just the specific, grounded certainty of someone who had been paying attention to their own character for longer than this mountain had existed. I have been alive since before the categories existed for what I am. The one thing I know about myself, completely, is that I do not harm the people I love. I don't know how. Zeus held his gaze for a moment. Naruto held it back. There was something in the holding, not competition, not dominance, just two beings recognizing each other's weight and finding it neither threatening nor dismissible. My mother is happy, Zeus said quietly. It was the genuine thing. The real reason he had come. She came to my table 3 days before I left and she looked lighter. Like something was different. I didn't know what it was. Now I think I understand. She is working on being happy, Naruto said. It is very much active work, not a state she arrived at. But yes. Good, Zeus said. And then again, more quietly, good. He left the garden with the same quality of non-announcement that he had arrived with, and Naruto watched him go and thought about all the things Zeus was, the liberation that had calcified into its own kind of control, the enormousness of will without the corresponding depth of self-knowledge, the genuine love that couldn't find its way to genuine behavior. He was a catastrophe and a wonder simultaneously, and the cosmos was going to live with both of those things for a very long time. Naruto sat in the garden and was not angry about any of it. He was just clear-eyed about it, which was the best you could do. Hera found him after dinner. The day had been long and complicated in the social way that Zeus's return made everything long and complicated, and dinner had been the formal kind that required the full performance from everyone present, the great hall, the attendants, the Olympian siblings who had gathered to welcome Zeus back, the particular theater of a court that was still learning what its own protocols were. Naruto had sat at the table and eaten and said approximately 4 things, which was his standard contribution to formal dinners, and watched the room do what rooms full of gods did, which was be exhausting and fascinating simultaneously. Rhea had sat across from him and they had communicated primarily through the kind of small, silent exchange that developed between people who knew each other well, a slight tilt of the head to indicate that Ares had just said something particularly bellicose, a raised eyebrow to communicate the observation that Demeter had consumed an amount of wine that suggested the evening was going to develop, a shared glance when Hestia said something that was unexpectedly and precisely funny, which startled a real sound from both of them simultaneously and drew several looks. Hera had presided at the table's head with the full queen architecture deployed and operating at peak capacity, managing the room with the invisible, constant attention of someone for whom this management had become entirely second nature. She had said exactly the right things to exactly the right people at exactly the right moments and the room had functioned. But Naruto, who had been watching her face learn to lower its guard over the course of weeks, could see the cost of raising it back up again, the specific exhaustion of reinstalling the architecture after you'd been living without it. Their eyes met once, across the full length of the table, over the heads of Ares and Athena having a low-voiced disagreement about siege tactics. What passed between them in that look was too many things to list but included, I know, and later, and something that was simply recognition of a specific shared state. Then Hera redirected her attention to something Poseidon was saying and the moment closed. Later turned out to be the East Terrace, because that was where Hera thought and they both knew it. He found her at the railing in the dark, which was where he'd half expected, and he came and stood beside her and neither of them said anything for a while, the comfortable silence that their silences had become. The sea was dark and enormous and the stars were very clear. He talked to you, she said. In the garden. Yes. What did you tell him? The truth. She turned to look at him. Which truth? That I care about you. That I'm not leaving. That his feelings about that are real but don't change the facts. He paused. And some things about architecture. Her eyes narrowed slightly. Architecture. The kind you build inside yourself. She was quiet for a moment. He came to me after. She stopped, and he could see her working with what she wanted to say, trying to find the honest version rather than the managed one. He was different. Not transformed. I'm not saying that. But present in a way he doesn't always manage. She looked at the sea. He said he had been seeing me as a function. He used that word. He said he was sorry for it. A pause. Which he has said before. But this time it had a different quality. Like he had actually understood what he was apologizing for rather than just understanding that an apology was required. Does it change anything? I don't know yet, she said honestly. It matters that it happened. I don't know yet what it changes. She turned back to the railing. What it doesn't change is what I know about myself now, which is more than what I knew 6 weeks ago. That won't go backward. No, he agreed. It won't. She was quiet for a moment that had specific weight. Then she said, "What are we doing?" He didn't ask what she meant. "Something that doesn't have a clean name," he said. "And doesn't need one. I'm a queen. I have a husband. I am the anchor point of an entire cosmological order." She said it without drama, just listing the facts. "And I am standing on my own terrace in the dark feeling things I don't have the category for." "You're very good at new categories," he said. She looked at him. The almost smile was there and fully real tonight, not stopping short of itself. That was almost glib. Almost. But not quite. She shook her head. "I made myself spend 6 weeks being very careful about what I was feeling," she said. "I told myself, he is interesting, and he sees me clearly, and it is fine to value that without it becoming something else. I was very rational about it." She looked at him directly. "And then you stood at the edge of the river and the entire river went golden and I understood that rational was not going to be sufficient." He held her gaze. "I know the moment." "I imagine you do." She was very still. "What are you going to do about it?" It was such a Hera question. So precisely herself, not asking what he felt, not navigating toward it through soft language, just, "What are you going to do?" Frontal, direct, the queen's instinct applied to personal terrain. He said, "Nothing that isn't wanted." "And if it is?" "Then I'm here," he said. Simple and complete. I'm not performing reticence. I'm not playing a strategy. I'm here, and I care about you, and I'm going to keep being here regardless of what you decide that means. Hera looked at him for a long time. He let the look happen, as he always did, because he had nothing to hide and the looking always arrived somewhere eventually. When it arrived this time it arrived somewhere he recognized, the same place Rhea's look had arrived that afternoon on the bench, the place beyond assessment, beyond cataloging, into the territory of simply being present with what was true. She turned back to the railing and he turned with her and they stood together with the sea below them and the stars above and the night doing its ancient, patient work, and her shoulder was very close to his, and the air between them had the particular quality of two people who have decided something without deciding it. "Rhea," she said. "Yes," he said. "She and I talked this afternoon. While you were in the garden with Zeus." A pause. For a long time. He waited. "She told me about the night you met," Hera said. "The rock, the surf. What she told you and how you listened." She paused. "She said you were the first person who had ever received what she said without trying to solve it." "I remember." "She also said," Hera stopped. He heard her choosing her words with care, which she always did but was doing with particular attention now. "She said that the two of you have something that she did not want me to be confused about in terms of how it sat next to whatever this is." A gesture that encompassed the terrace, the two of them, the fact of his shoulder near hers. "What did you say?" he asked. "I said I wasn't confused," she said. "I said that what I felt was entirely its own thing and didn't require explanation by comparison." She paused. "And then she said that she didn't want me to be uncertain about whether what she and I were building between us had space for whatever I was going to decide." She said it carefully, the report of a conversation that had been very deliberate on both sides. She said she didn't want this to require anyone to choose. He was quiet for a moment. "What did you say to that?" he asked. "I said I had been thinking the same thing but wasn't sure how to raise it without presuming something." She glanced at him sideways. She laughed. "She said you would be insufferably calm about this too." "She's right," he said. "Are you?" She looked at him. "Calm?" "No," he said honestly. "Not particularly. I feel something quite specific and it is not calm." But I'm not going to manage it in a direction that isn't real. He paused. What Rhea and I have is decades old and it is entirely its own thing. What you and I have is newer and is also entirely its own thing. Those two things are not in competition. Hera absorbed this. He could see her processing it through the specific rigor she applied to everything, not looking for the flaw in it exactly, but insisting on understanding it completely before she accepted it. It requires, she said finally, a great deal of trust between all three parties. Yes. And a complete absence of the kind of possessiveness that treats people as territory. Yes. She looked at the sea. I am not a possessive person by nature, she said. I am a person who insists on honesty. On complete, ongoing honesty. She turned to look at him and her eyes were very clear. If that condition is met, complete honesty, no performance, no management of what is actually happening, then the other things are, she paused. Then I can think about the other things. Complete honesty, he said. Always. That's not a condition, it's just who I am. She held his gaze. He held hers. Something settled between them, not the settling of something concluded but the settling of a foundation, something that had been established and could now be built on. It's a strange life, she said. It's an extraordinary life, he said. There's a difference. He found Rhea in the North Garden, which had turned out to be her preferred spot on Olympus. The earth there ran shallow to the substrate, which she had described once as feeling like being in a room where you could hear the walls breathing. She was sitting in the dark with her back against the garden's central stone, which was a piece of basalt that had been there before the palace and before the mountain's claim and before everything except the very old things, and she was doing nothing except being in contact with the ground and the night. She looked up when he came in and the look was very simple. Just, you. How is she? Rhea asked. Honest, he said. Entirely herself. Good. She held out her hand and he sat beside her against the basalt and took her hand the way he had in the afternoon, and they sat together in the North Garden with the deep earth under them and the stars overhead and the palace full of the complicated lives of complicated beings around them. Zeus? She asked. Working on something. I don't know if he'll get there. But he's doing the work. Rhea was quiet. He's my son, she said. Not defending him. Just naming the full complexity of what that meant, the love and the frustration and the grief of watching someone you made repeat patterns you recognize. I know. I want better things for him than he's capable of wanting for himself yet. He'll get there or he won't, Naruto said. That's his. Not yours. She leaned her head against his shoulder. I know, she said. I'm still learning how to know that in my body and not just my head. He felt her weight against him and thought about the rock by the sea, how far they had come from it, how present it still was. The night was the same dark and the stars were the same stars, the only continuous thread through all the ages. She's extraordinary, Rhea said quietly. She is, he said. She is going to surprise you, Rhea said. She has more in her than even she currently knows. And she's already extraordinary. A pause. I have been watching her for years from the outside. From inside, she is remarkable. I know, he said. You've been seeing it. Since the East Terrace drainage conversation. Rhea's shoulder moved with a laugh. That's very specific. She sent a functionary away empowered rather than diminished and she didn't even notice she'd done it, he said. I noticed. That's who she is, Rhea said. Under all the armor. She builds things. They were quiet for a while, and the North Garden held them, and the basalt was ancient under their backs, and somewhere in the palace Hera was moving through the halls doing the evening inspection she always did, thinking the things she thought when she moved and thought together, and somewhere else Zeus was sitting with something uncomfortable and deciding whether to face it or route around it, and the mountain was being its patient enormous self, and the cosmos was breathing normally with its fault lines sealed and its deep appetites at baseline. Naruto sat in the north garden with Rhea's head on his shoulder and thought about mountains growing and bread going cold and bees that had no business being at altitude and rivers that went golden and queens who built cathedrals out of what they noticed and titanesses who said true things in the dark. He thought about how the world had felt slightly more vivid since a specific night, and how the vividness had compounded rather than faded, and how he had been alive long enough to know what that meant. He thought, this is the point. This, specifically, right here. Not the sealing of fault lines, not the holding back of the void. This. The ordinary, irreplaceable weight of being known and choosing to remain. Rhea's hand tightened slightly around his and he held it back and neither of them needed to say anything at all. Chapter 6, What Grows After 6 months after the fault lines sealed, Hestia came to find Naruto. He was at the river, the same river, the one that had gone golden, because he had developed the habit of checking it regularly the way you checked on something that had been through a serious illness and was now technically recovered but deserved ongoing attention. The river was fine. It was always fine now. He came anyway, because the habit was also an excuse to be alone with the water and the birds, which he was still finding excellent company. Hestia came along the bank from the east, and he knew her before he saw her because of the warmth that preceded her, not metaphorical warmth, actual warmth, the specific ambient heat of someone whose nature was essentially fire made patient. She was the oldest of Zeus's siblings in terms of the order they had been swallowed, and the oldest was also the last to return, and she had been on Olympus for months now and was still quietly, continuously in the process of figuring out who she was outside of a very long trauma. She sat beside him at the water and they looked at the river together for a while. "My mother told me about you," she said. "How you helped. What you did before Zeus was born." "She didn't have to tell you," he said. "She wanted to." Hestia looked at the water. She was quieter than the other Olympians, with the quality of someone who had spent a very long time in a very small space and had developed an entire interior world in it, which was both a survival skill and something that now made the exterior world slightly too large and too loud. "She said you were the one who made the plan. The stone. She had the idea," he said. "I figured out the mechanics." Hestia looked at him with dark eyes that were very steady and very old in a way that the other young Olympians' eyes weren't. She had been conscious inside Cronus for years. Whatever that did to a person, she had made something of it that was not damaged but was absolutely distinct. "Thank you," she said. It was simple and direct and had nothing performative in it. "You're welcome," he said, the same way. She looked back at the river. "It went golden," she said. "The river. My sister told me." "Yes." She said it was the most extraordinary thing she'd seen. A pause. "Hera doesn't say that lightly." "No," he agreed. Hestia nodded slowly, as if confirming something she'd already thought. "She's different this year," she said. "Since you've been here. She moves differently through rooms. There's less management of herself." She looked at him. "I didn't know her before Zeus brought her here. So I only know the before as what I've heard. But Rhea knows the before." "Yes. Rhea says she is more herself now than she has been since the early days when the marriage was still, when things were still being decided." She paused, choosing the soft word for a hard thing. "Before Zeus made his patterns clear." Naruto watched the river. A small silver fish moved through the shallows with the focused urgency of something that had somewhere important to be. "Are you staying?" Hestia asked. "Yes," he said. "Good," she said, with the quiet finality of someone who had asked the question that mattered and received the answer that mattered. She stood and brushed grass from her robe and looked at the river one more time. "The water is warmer here than it should be for the season," she said. "Did you know that?" "I suspected." She looked at him. The warmth that preceded her was very gentle up close. "The earth remembers what was asked of it," she said. "When you lit the river, you changed something. The river is different now. Not dangerous. Just, more than it was." She paused. Things that are touched by what you are don't go back to exactly what they were. She walked back along the bank the way she had come, and the warmth diminished with her distance, and he sat with the river and thought about what she'd said, which was true and was also more than an observation about a river. The Titan sealing project finished on a morning in early spring. It was not a dramatic finish. The last of the secondary fault lines was not the largest or the most significant, that work had been done months ago, but it was the last, and Rhea had been methodical and thorough about it the way she was about everything, and when she pressed her palms to the ground for the final closure and sat back and opened her eyes, she looked at the 6 Titan earthworkers around her and said, with complete simplicity, "That's it. It's done." There was a moment of silence, and then Epimetheus, who had been on every single working since the beginning and who had grown from hesitant and overwhelmed to something that looked increasingly like a person who had discovered what they were for, said, "We did that," with quiet wonder. "You did that," Rhea said. "Most of it was you." He shook his head. "We learned how from you." "Then we all did it," she said, and stood and offered him a hand up, which he took, and there was something in the gesture and the receipt of it that was small and enormous simultaneously, a Titaness of the earth and one of the younger Titans, in the new world, building something out of the wreckage of the old one. Naruto was standing at the edge of the working site and he felt the final closure in his bones the way you felt a distant door shut, not dramatic, just definitive. The structure was sound. The deep appetite of the cosmos was properly behind its proper barriers. The world was as stable as it was supposed to be. He looked at Rhea across the site and she looked at him and something passed between them that was just, "We did that. From the stone in Crete to this. The whole long thread of it." She smiled at him. A full, open, unguarded smile, the kind she gave freely now, and it still had the quality of something that had been underground for a very long time breaking into the light. Hera threw a dinner that evening that was not the formal kind. This was a thing she had started doing occasionally over the preceding months, a different kind of gathering, not the court dinner with its full theater but something smaller and more itself, in the informal room with the good proportions, with the people who were actually wanted rather than the people whose attendance was politically required. The food was better because the kitchen wasn't performing. The conversation was better for the same reason. Tonight it was Rhea, and Hestia, and Athena who had apparently earned a standing invitation through the specific combination of being genuinely interesting to Hera and never requiring the performance of deference that the formal court demanded, and Epimetheus who was there because Rhea had brought him and Hera had assessed him in about 3 minutes and found him sufficient, and Naruto. The dinner had the quality that the best dinners had, which was that nobody wanted to be anywhere else. The conversation moved through several different territories. Athena had been thinking about the problem of mortal justice systems, which she'd been developing with a focus and rigor that suggested she had a specific vision in mind, and she and Hera went at the subject with the concentrated energy of 2 very intelligent people discovering that the other one had good arguments. Rhea and Hestia talked, at first carefully and then less carefully, about what it had been like before, not the worst of it, not the direct horror, but the texture of their lives, the small things, Hestia describing the particular quality of Rhea's voice as she remembered it from inside and Rhea's face doing something so unguarded and so complete that everyone at the table found something to look at other than her for a moment. Epimetheus, emboldened by wine and the specific atmosphere of a room where people were being real with each other, said something unexpectedly funny about the construction of one of the outer halls and made Hera laugh, a real laugh, the one that was only audible in contexts like this one. And Naruto saw the moment Epimetheus understood that he had made the Queen of Olympus genuinely laugh and the way it altered something in the architecture of his face. Naruto ate and drank and said things occasionally and mostly watched, which was his preferred mode in rooms like this, not because he was absent but because watching was a way of being in things he had loved his whole life. The texture of how people were when they were themselves. The specific way this collection of beings had found each other and made something that hadn't existed before. At some point late in the evening, when the food was mostly finished and the wine was doing its work and the conversation had gone somewhere more personal, Hestia said to him, across the table, "Where were you?" "Before the mountains." "What were you doing?" "Watching things become," he said. "What things?" He thought about how to answer this in a way that was honest and not impossible to receive. The first time the ocean had a current, he said. That took a while to develop. I watched that. He paused. The first thing that was alive and knew it was alive. That was extraordinary. He looked at the table. The first fire. Hestia went very still. I was there, he said. When it happened. The first actual fire. Not divine fire, just the ordinary kind. Something striking something else and a thing burning that had not burned before. He looked at her. I sat with it for 3 days. I couldn't leave. Hestia looked at him with those steady, deep eyes. What was it like? He thought about it honestly. Like watching the world decide to be more than it was, he said. Like the world discovering it could do a thing it hadn't done yet, and doing it, and the doing being so unrepeatable that even though fire has happened millions of times since, that specific first time, he shook his head. Nothing else is like the first time. She looked at him for a long moment. I want to hear everything, she said quietly. Not tonight. But everything. There's time, he said. Yes, she agreed. There's time. Rhea stayed after the others had gone. Hestia and Athena left together, mid-conversation still, Athena's hands moving with the gestures she used when she was genuinely engaged with an idea. Epimetheus left with the careful, slightly dazed quality he'd had since the laughter, as if he needed to go somewhere quiet and process the evening. Hera walked them out and came back and stood in the doorway of the informal room looking at the table with its evidence of a good dinner, and Naruto and Rhea were still at the table, and the three of them were alone with the good proportions and the candlelight going lower. Hera sat back down in her chair and said, "That was a good evening." "Yes," Rhea said. "Epimetheus is going to be fine," Hera said. "He just needed to be treated like he was already fine," Rhea said. "Yes." Hera looked at her. "You do that well." "I had practice," Rhea said. "The entire Titan cohort needed it when the war ended." She paused. "You do it too. You just don't notice." Hera made the small expression that meant she was filing something. "I notice when you do it. I'm less aware of my own technique." "It's the same technique," Rhea said. "You just deploy it from further away. More architecture between you and the person. Not worse, just different range." Hera looked at Naruto. "And his technique?" "Just being there," Rhea said. "Completely. That's the whole technique." Naruto looked at both of them. "I'm still in the room." "We know," Hera said, with the dry precision that was entirely her. They sat with the low candles and the table between them, and it was late and the mountain was settled and the cosmos was stable, and the weight of the evening, the good kind, the specific heaviness of a day that had contained enough to be satisfying, was settling around them. "I want to say something," Hera said. She said it in the voice she used when she had something to say that she had been deciding how to say for some time. She looked at the table first and then looked up and her gaze moved between both of them and settled with clear intention into that openness he had seen her develop over months. "I spent the first years of my rule performing certainty about everything because uncertainty felt like weakness and weakness felt like the edge of a very steep drop." She paused. "I am uncertain about many things now. About what this is, between the three of us, what it's called, what it looks like going forward." She looked at Naruto, then Rhea. "And I find that the uncertainty is not frightening. It's interesting. It feels like standing at the beginning of something rather than the edge of something." "It is the beginning," Rhea said quietly. "Yes." Hera looked at her hands on the table. "I have not often let things be at the beginning. I usually need to know the whole shape before I'll commit to the premise." A pause. "I'm committing to the premise." Naruto said nothing. He let the statement be what it was, which was enormous, coming from Hera. Rhea reached across the table and put her hand over Hera's, which was the most physical spontaneity he had seen from Rhea since long before tonight, and Hera looked at the hand and then at Rhea, and the queen went down entirely, and it was just Hera, the person, looking at Rhea, the person, and something passed between them that was not the recognition of equals but the recognition of people who had carried specific, different, and wholly separate griefs and found each other across them. "I have wanted a friend," Hera said. It came out slightly rougher than her other words. "A real one. Not a court attendant, not a diplomatic ally. Someone who," she stopped. "I know," Rhea said. "I know exactly." Hera looked at Naruto over their joined hands. "And you," she said. "Yes," he said. Not answering a question she hadn't asked. Just, yes. All of it. Whatever you're about to say and also the things you haven't said yet. Yes. She held his gaze and her expression was the one he had come to think of as simply Hera, not the queen, not the armor, not the performance, just the particular person she was when she was most fully herself, which was extraordinary in a way that was private and complete and had nothing to do with Olympus. She said, "I used to think that love was a negotiation. That you offered something and received something in equivalent measure and kept careful account of the balance." She looked at the table. "I made that calculation from necessity. Because the love I was given was conditional in ways that were not always visible until the conditions were broken." She looked up. "This doesn't feel like a negotiation." "It isn't," he said. "What is it then?" "It's a choice," he said. "Made freely. Without conditions. Made again every day." Hera looked at him for a long time. She looked at Rhea. She looked at the candles burning low. "Every day," she said. "Every day," he said. "That's the whole of it." Zeus found Naruto on the mountain's peak in the weeks that followed. Not the training court this time, and not the garden. The peak itself, where the air was thin and the view was everything and there was nowhere for performance to hide. Zeus climbed it himself, without flight, which Naruto noticed and thought something about. He arrived breathing hard and sat on the cold rock with his hands on his knees and looked at the world spread below and said nothing for a while. Naruto had been there since before dawn. He had been watching the light do what it did to the valleys at sunrise, the wave of illumination moving from east to west, and thinking about Hestia's observation that things touched by what he was didn't go back to what they were, and considering whether that was a responsibility or simply a fact of nature, and arriving, as he usually arrived with such questions, at both. "I have been thinking," Zeus said eventually. "Good," Naruto said. Zeus looked at him sideways. "You say that like it isn't obvious that I should be thinking." "Not all powerful beings do it," Naruto said. "The thinking. They get to a certain level of power and the feedback mechanisms that require thinking stop working. Nothing pushes back. So they stop." "Is that what happened to Cronus?" "Partly. The paranoia did the rest." He looked at the valleys. "Power without accountability reads the world wrong. It interprets everything as either threat or tribute and can't see the category of just a thing happening." Zeus was quiet for a moment. "I've done that," he said. "You're doing it less," Naruto said. "Since when?" "Since you climbed the mountain instead of flying. Since you asked me what I was going to do rather than telling me what I was going to do." He paused. "Since you said you weren't sure you had the capacity for change. That was the moment I thought, he might get there." Zeus looked at him. "You've been monitoring me. I pay attention to everything. You're included." A sound that was almost a laugh. "That's not comforting." "I didn't intend comfort. I intended honesty." Zeus looked at the world below for a while. The light had completed its morning passage and the valleys were fully lit and ordinary and beautiful in the patient way of things that were beautiful every morning without needing acknowledgement. "Hera is different," Zeus said. "You said that before. I'm saying it again because it keeps being true in new ways." He looked at his hands on his knees. "She said something to me last week. About the court. About the way I'd been running the Eastern Domain disputes. He paused. She was right. She was completely right, and I had been doing the thing you said, reading it as tribute and threat and missing the actual shape of the problem. He looked at Naruto. How long has she been seeing that clearly? Always, Naruto said. She had nowhere safe to put it. Zeus absorbed this with the expression of someone for whom a piece of information is doing significant work. I wasted years, he said. Yes, Naruto said. Some of them. Is that fixable? Not backward, Naruto said. Forward. The wasted years are wasted. What you do now is what you do now. Zeus nodded slowly. The wind moved across the peak and the cold air was what it was, and neither of them made any move to be warmer than they were. My mother is happy, Zeus said again. Genuinely. I sat with her for 2 hours last week and she was present in a way she hasn't been with me before. Like she wasn't managing the conversation. Like she was just in it. She's been working on that, Naruto said. 4 months. Because of you. Because of herself. I was present while she did it. Zeus made a noise that acknowledged the distinction. You keep saying that. That it's them. That you're just there. Because it's true. It's also a deflection. Naruto looked at him. Zeus met the look with the specific steadiness of someone who had grown into his own perception and was now willing to use it. You do something, Zeus said. When you're with people. I've watched it. The room changes. Not because you announce yourself but because you're entirely there. All of you. And most people, even gods, are only partially there at any given moment. Part of them is somewhere else, managing something, planning something. He paused. You're just there. Completely. And people feel it. They expand into it. Naruto was quiet for a moment. He thought about what Zeus had just said, which was more perceptive than he'd expected and deserved honest engagement. The very old ones, he said, who don't go the way of treating small things as small, they learn to be present. Because if you're not present you miss things. And missing things, at the scale of what's out there to pay attention to, is the actual waste. He paused. I've been paying attention for a very long time. It becomes a habit. Can it be learned? Yes, Naruto said. Slowly. And it requires wanting to more than you want the alternative. Zeus nodded. He looked at the world below, and the particular expression on his face was not the king's expression or the god of thunder expression or the liberated hero expression. It was something younger and more real, a man on a cold mountain asking real questions. I'm going to try, he said. With Hera. With my mother. He paused. I'm going to fail at it sometimes. Yes, Naruto said. You will. That's not encouraging. It's the truth. Which is more useful? He paused. Failing and continuing is different from failing and stopping. One of those is the actual problem. Zeus sat with that. The wind came through again, persistent and cold and entirely indifferent to the conversation happening on the rock. I don't know what to make of you, he said finally. I thought about it for 6 months and I still don't. You don't have to, Naruto said. You're in my home. You're with my wife and my mother. In some sense I don't have full language for. Yes. And I'm on a mountain having a conversation with you that I could not have had with my own father, whom I technically liberated from the role. He shook his head. That's strange. The whole thing is strange, Naruto agreed. Most worthwhile things are. Zeus looked at him. Do you love them? Yes. Both. Yes. Are you going to hurt them? No. Zeus was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, with the simple honesty that appeared in him when he dropped everything else, then I suppose I'm grateful. In a complicated way. Complicated is fine, Naruto said. It'll have to be, Zeus said, and stood and looked at the view one more time and then, and Naruto thought this was entirely the right choice, flew back down the mountain, because he had climbed it and that was the important part and there was no requirement to punish himself further than the cold. Spring came properly and the mountain celebrated it in the way mountains celebrated things, which was by making the lower elevations extravagant and the upper ones only marginally less brutal. The garden in which the mountain was winning its argument had achieved something that was no longer argument but collaboration. A middle space had emerged between Hera's aesthetic intention and the mountain's natural inclination, and the result was something that neither party had planned but that both parties appeared to consider acceptable. Naruto was in the garden on the morning that felt most like the season having fully arrived, warm enough to sit without effort, the light with that particular early spring quality of being new again, the birds doing their territorial announcements with serious commitment. He had the flatbread. It was warm. He had finally, definitively, solved the flatbread problem, which had taken longer than most things he had solved in his life and which he considered a legitimate achievement. Rhea came from the upper path with wildflowers in her hand, not picked for arrangement, just picked because she'd passed them and they were there, which was exactly like her, and sat beside him on the bench that was their bench now, as fully as anything was anyone's. "You're eating it warm," she said. "Third day running," he said. She looked at the flowers in her hand with a small, private expression. "The project's final report goes to Olympus today," she said. "Official record. The fault line ceiling, the team, the methodology." She paused. "I put your name in it. You didn't have to. I wanted the record to be accurate." She looked at him. "You were there. At every stage. The record should say so." He looked at the flowers. Purple, mostly, with some yellow, the colors of late winter things celebrating their survival into spring. "How are the Titans?" he asked. "Better," she said. "Genuinely better, not managed better. Epimetheus is talking about building something. I don't know what yet. But he has that energy, the one people get when they're starting to imagine forward instead of just navigating the present." She paused. Hyperion stopped reaching for the wall behind him. "He told me last week. Said he noticed one morning that he hadn't done it and that it had been several days." She was quiet for a moment. "Small things." "Not small," he said. "Not small," she agreed. They sat with the warm morning and the wildflowers and the flatbread, and Hera came through the upper garden entrance with a document in her hand and the focused expression of someone in the middle of something administrative, and she looked up and found them on the bench and the focused expression shifted in the specific way it shifted for them. The gear change from queen to person that had become fluid and rapid and entirely natural over the months. She came and sat on his other side, which was where she sat, as fully as anything was anyone's. "The Eastern dispute is resolved," she said. "The sea gods accepted the boundary. I had to revise the tide rights 3 times and eventually just wrote the entire framework from scratch because the existing language was inadequate." She looked at the document. "I'm going to propose it as the standard going forward. The existing framework is 40 years old and reflects the political priorities of a court that no longer exists." "You should do that," Rhea said. "I intend to." She folded the document and set it aside, which was a distinct physical gesture of, "I am done with that for now." She looked at the garden. "The collaboration is working," she said, gesturing at the middle space where argument had become something else. "I noticed," Naruto said. "I didn't intend it." She paused. "I had a very clear vision of what this corner should be. The mountain had other ideas. I kept redirecting it. It kept, not complying but negotiating." She looked at it with an expression that was somewhere between analytical and appreciative. "At some point I realized the negotiation was producing something better than my original vision. And?" Rhea prompted. "And I let it." She said it simply, with the particular quality she had when she was acknowledging something that had cost her something to learn. "Which is not a thing I do naturally. Letting the process have its own wisdom." Naruto looked at the corner of the garden. The mountain stone rose in formations that were not where Hera had wanted stone, but what had grown in the space between them, wild things, persistent things, things that had no business being at this altitude and were thriving anyway, had a quality that was beyond either party's original intention. "I've been thinking," Hera said, "about what comes next." "For the court?" Rhea asked. "For all of it. The court, the order, the everything." She looked at the sky. "We have been building Olympus in response to what came before it. Every decision has been partly about what Cronus did and what we needed to be instead." She paused. "At some point that has to stop being the primary frame. We have to start building toward something rather than away from something." "What do you want to build toward?" Naruto asked. She looked at him. It was a real question and she treated it as one, thinking about it with the honest, careful attention she gave to things that mattered. "Something that doesn't require anyone to perform their worth," she said finally. "An order where power is held by people who've earned the wisdom to hold it, not just the strength. Where the people who are subject to it have some stake in it. Some voice." She paused. "I don't know the full shape yet. But that's the direction." "That's a large project," Rhea said. "Yes." She looked at the garden. "I like large projects." Naruto looked at her sideways and she caught the look and the ghost smile arrived, fully, as it did more and more easily now, quickly and genuinely and without needing to be coaxed. "You're going to help me," she said. "Not a question." "Yes," he said. "Both of you," she said, to Rhea. "Obviously," Rhea said. Hera nodded with the specific decisiveness of someone who has confirmed what they already knew and can now proceed. She looked at the flatbread in his hand. "Is that warm?" "Yes," he said. "How?" she said, with genuine exasperation. "You have had cold flatbread every morning for months." "I figured it out," he said. 3 days ago," Rhea said. "After how long of not figuring it out?" "Approximately 6 months," Naruto said. Hera stared at him. Then she took a piece of the flatbread, which was warm, and ate it, and said nothing else on the subject, which was its own kind of verdict. The afternoon went long, and the conversation went where conversations went when the people having them had enough trust to let them go anywhere, and the mountain moved through the season-specific sequence of light it moved through every spring, and the garden held them. Naruto sat between these two women in the warm afternoon and felt the day as completely as he had felt any day in a life full of days that had contained entire geological epochs, and he thought about what Hestia had said at the river. Things that are touched by what you are don't go back to exactly what they were. He thought, the river went golden and stayed warmer. The garden became something better than either party's intention. The fault lines were sealed by people who used the work to remember who they were. The Titans reached for walls that weren't there and gradually stopped. He thought about a queen who had learned to walk through her palace like it was hers. A Titaness who named her children to a stranger in the dark and was no longer a stranger to herself. He thought, this is what I am. Not the lighting of rivers or the pressing back of the void or the watching of mountains form. This. The insistence that things grow. That the broken become different rather than lesser. That the people in the radius of what I am become more themselves. It was not the origin story anyone would have written for him. He had no origin story that anyone had written or could. He had simply appeared, golden and present, with no traceable cause, the cosmos's insistence on itself given a specific, stubborn, laughing form. He had spent ages watching from comfortable distances. He had loved civilizations and carried their endings. He had been at every beginning worth being at and had remained standing at every conclusion. He was the breath going out, the growth, the persistent and fundamental yes that kept existence from collapsing back into nothing. And he was here. Specifically and completely here, on this bench, with Rhea's hand loosely in his and Hera's shoulder close to his and the garden doing its collaborative work and the mountain breathing around them and the cosmos doing what the cosmos did, which was continue. He thought about the first fire. 3 days he had sat with it, unable to leave. The world discovering it could do something it had never done, and doing it, and the doing being unrepeatable. He thought, yes. Exactly like that. Rhea said something to Hera and Hera said something back and they laughed, both of them, the real kind, the fully unrehearsed kind, and the sound of it moved through the garden like the first warm day after a very long winter, not dramatic, not announced, just suddenly and unmistakably itself. He held it all. The day, the warmth, the sound, the specific and irreplaceable weight of being known and remaining. He held it the way he held everything he loved, which was completely and without the pretense that it was permanent, because the holding was not about permanence. The holding was about now, which was the only place love actually lived, not in the promise of forever but in the fully inhabited fact of today. The mountains were still growing somewhere under the world. Patient and immense and entirely committed to what they were becoming. He thought he finally understood what they were composing. Not a monument. Not a statement. Just the ongoing, inarguable fact of existence insisting on itself, day after day, reaching toward whatever came next with the same stubborn, golden, laughing certainty. All right, he thought, and meant it completely. Let's see what comes next. The afternoon stayed warm. The garden was entirely itself. Somewhere below, the river ran clear and warmer than it should have been for the season, touched and changed and continuous, the way things were when what you were moved through them and left the world more than it had been. He ate his flatbread while it was warm.